I still think about him. Even now, after all these years, his face comes back to me in dreams, smudged by the sunlight, half hidden under that too-big baseball cap he always wore. His name was Danny, and the last time anyone saw him alive, he was walking along the train tracks behind our town, and I was the one who watched him go. I grew up in a small place, the kind of town where everybody knows your family, and the streets are quiet after dark. It wasn't much, just a cluster of old houses, a diner, a church, and endless woods that wrapped around the edges like a heavy blanket. The tracks cut through those woods, a rusty scar that ran all the way to the next county. Kids weren't supposed to play back there, but we always did. It felt dangerous in the way kids love, like sneaking cigarettes behind the school or telling ghost stories you almost believe. Danny was younger than me by 2 years. He was 12 the summer he vanished, small for his age, but full of energy. He'd follow me and my friends around even when we told him to go home. He wanted so badly to be included, to prove he wasn't just a little kid. And the truth is, I liked him. He had this stubborn spark, like he didn't know how to give up. The day he disappeared was hot and heavy, the kind of day where the air feels thick in your lungs. I remember I had a headache from the sun. My friends had gone off already, and Danny was walking beside me, kicking rocks along the tracks. We were headed home, the woods stretching out on both sides, buzzing with insects. I told him to turn back, that it was getting late, but he just grinned and said he'd beat me to the bridge. The old bridge was a half-mile ahead, a place we used to throw stones into the river below. I didn't care enough to argue. My legs were tired, and I slowed down, letting him run ahead. That's the picture that stays with me. His small figure in the fading light, the cap bouncing as he jogged along the rails, the woods swallowing him on both sides. I didn't know it would be the last time I ever saw him. When I got home, my mom was already calling me for dinner. I didn't think to mention Danny. I thought he'd gone straight back to his house like always. But later that night, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. His mom had called around. Danny hadn't come home. At first, nobody panicked. Kids wandered. He'd show up, tired and hungry, embarrassed for making everyone worry. That's what they said. But when morning came and his bed was still empty, the town shifted. It was like the air itself changed. I was sitting on the porch when 2 police cars rolled past. The sound of their radios carried in the stillness. I remember gripping the railing so tight the paint flaked off in my hand. I didn't tell anyone I'd been with him. Not yet. That afternoon, word spread fast. Search parties formed. People walked in groups through the woods, calling his name. I went with them, stumbling over roots, my throat dry from shouting. Every snap of a twig made me look twice, thinking maybe he'd step out, sheepish, ready to come home. But the woods stayed silent. By evening, I finally told an officer that I'd seen him last. My voice shook as I explained how he'd gone ahead toward the bridge. The officer wrote it down, his pen scratching, his eyes sharp. My mom's hand rested heavy on my shoulder, but it didn't stop the guilt rising like bile. For days they searched. Trained dogs sniffed along the tracks. Volunteers dragged the river near the bridge. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping the sky. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint, not even that baseball cap. It was like the earth had swallowed him whole. The bridge became a kind of shrine. People left flowers there, candles that burned down to wax puddles. I couldn't stand to look at it. Every time I passed, I remembered the way his small frame blurred into the trees. I wondered if I should have followed, if maybe he'd tripped, gotten lost, needed help. That thought gnawed at me, carving guilt deeper and deeper until I could hardly breathe. The police questioned me again and again. Each time the same. What time did I last see him? Which direction was he going? Did I notice anyone else nearby? I didn't. It was just us and the woods. But the way they stared at me made me feel like I was hiding something, like maybe I didn't even know the truth myself. Weeks passed, and the search thinned. People went back to their lives, though the weight never really lifted. Danny's mom kept his room exactly the same. Sometimes I'd see her sitting on the porch at dusk, eyes fixed on the road, waiting. Always waiting. I tried to move on, but the woods had changed for me. Every time I walked past the tracks, I felt watched. The trees seemed thicker, darker, as if they'd closed ranks to keep their secret. Sometimes at night, When the wind carried just right, I swore I heard his name whispered between the branches. The worst part was the dreams. They started a month after he vanished. In them, I'd see Danny standing by the tracks, his cap pulled low, his face hidden in shadow. He never spoke, but his hand would lift, pointing toward the woods. And every time, I'd wake with my heart pounding, sweat chilling my skin. I told myself it was just guilt, my brain chewing on the what-ifs. But deep down, I wondered if it was more. If maybe some part of him was still out there, calling me back to the place where he disappeared. Years have gone by and still no trace was ever found. The case turned cold, packed into dusty files in some back office. New tragedies came, new headlines. People forgot, but I didn't. I couldn't, because I was the last one to see him alive. Sometimes, late at night, I walk past the old tracks. They're overgrown now, weeds curling between the ties, the rails rusting to red. And in the hush of the trees, I swear I see a small figure up ahead, just out of reach. A boy running toward the bridge, never looking back, and I wonder if he's still waiting for me to follow. The night after Danny went missing, the whole town gathered. You could feel the weight of it in the air. Neighbors who'd lived side by side for decades, suddenly looking at each other with suspicion, wondering who had seen what, who knew more than they were saying. The search began at dawn. I remember the parking lot of the church filled with cars and trucks, people spilling out with flashlights, walking sticks, and old canvas backpacks. Men who normally spent Sundays in work boots and flannel now stood with serious faces, ready to comb through every inch of the woods. Mothers huddled in clusters, whispering, glancing toward the trees like they were staring into the mouth of something alive. I was there too, even though part of me wanted to hide at home. I kept replaying it in my mind. Danny running ahead, his cap bouncing, his voice echoing over his shoulder. And then nothing. The line between memory and nightmare had blurred, but I couldn't tell anyone that. They were already looking at me differently, like being the last one to see him made me guilty by default. We split into groups. I walked with my dad and 3 neighbors. The woods smelled damp, the kind of heavy scent that clings to your clothes and hair. Birds cried overhead, but otherwise it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you swallow your breath because you're afraid of breaking it. We called his name every few steps. "Danny! Danny, you out here?" My voice cracked on the second shout, like it didn't want to carry. My dad's voice was louder, steadier, but the trees gave nothing back. After a few hours, we circled back to the church for water and sandwiches. The sun was high and sweat clung to every face. People looked drained, their hope already thinning. That's when I noticed something. Small scratches across a few men's arms. Thin lines, red and fresh, like brambles had grabbed at them. But they all said the same thing. They hadn't walked through any thorns. I tried to push the thought away, but more people came back with marks on their skin. Not just scratches this time. Long streaks down their necks, faint bruises blooming around their wrists. Nobody had an explanation. Maybe the woods were denser than we thought. Maybe panic made us careless. That's what they told themselves. That night, the search parties kept going. Lanterns swung in the dark like ghost lights, moving between the trees. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, the window cracked open, listening to the faint calls of people still out there. But around midnight, something changed. The voices stopped. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had cut the sound with a knife. For a full minute, the world outside my window was silent. Then, from far away, I heard one word. My name, not Danny's, mine. It was whispered, stretched thin, like the voice had traveled miles just to reach me. I sat upright, my chest tight, my throat dry. I wanted to tell myself it was just my imagination, that maybe I'd dreamed it. But I knew. I knew it came from the woods. The next morning, I went back out with the others. Some of the volunteers hadn't returned home at all, though. People muttered about it in low voices, saying maybe they'd stayed at the firehouse or gone back out before dawn. But I saw the way their families looked, tight-mouthed, pale. They hadn't come home, and no one wanted to say it out loud. We pressed deeper into the forest that day, tracing the tracks toward the bridge. That's where I'd last seen him, so everyone thought it was the logical point to focus on. I hated every second of it. My heart hammered in my chest with each step, my legs stiff like they wanted to run the other way. The bridge loomed ahead, old wood darkened by age, the river below sluggish and gray. People spread out along the banks, dragging poles through the water, their voices sharp with frustration. I stood on the bridge itself, staring down at the current, my eyes burning. That's when I saw it. Something pale caught on the rocks at the edge of the water. My stomach lurched, my mouth dry. I thought it was him. Thought this was the moment it would end. But when the others pulled it free, it wasn't a body. It was a shirt. Danny's shirt. Everyone froze. It was unmistakable. The faded red stripes, the frayed collar. His mom had described it the night he went missing. The crowd pressed closer, voices overlapping, questions flying. My head spun, but there was something wrong. The shirt was dry. Perfectly dry, like it had been set there just minutes before. The adults muttered excuses. Maybe the fabric dried in the sun, maybe it got snagged higher up and only now loosened. But their voices trembled. They didn't believe their own words. Neither did I. That night the air grew colder. The search continued, but people were quieter, less eager to wander too far from one another. I stayed near my dad, my eyes flicking constantly to the shadows between the trees, and then the whispers started again. Not loud, not clear, but threaded into the night air like smoke. I heard my name once more, pulled thin, curling between the trunks. Others froze too. I saw one of the men turn in circles, his flashlight beam shaking. He whispered his daughter's name, swearing he'd heard her voice calling, but she was safe at home. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just me. Something in those woods was speaking with our voices. By the third day, fewer volunteers showed up. Fear had spread. Families begged their husbands, wives, children not to go back in. But some did anyway, driven by duty or guilt or the hope that maybe Danny was still alive. I wanted to hope too, but every time I pictured his face, it came to me in dreams. His shadowed eyes, his hand pointing into the trees. And I couldn't shake the feeling that if I followed, I'd never come back. I don't remember when the search stopped exactly. There wasn't a single day when they all agreed. It just slowed, then dwindled, until only the professionals came, state police with their dogs and equipment. But even they left after a while, their trucks rumbling down the highway, leaving silence in their place. What lingered was the fear, the kind that stains a town forever. Some people moved away after that, said they couldn't raise kids in a place where one had disappeared without a trace. The rest of us stayed, but we didn't talk about it, not openly. It became one of those stories you pass in whispers, something to keep children from wandering too far. But I knew the truth, because I'd heard the woods call my name, and sometimes, late at night, I still do. Even after the official search ended, I couldn't stay away. The others gave up one by one. They had jobs, families, reasons to move on, but I couldn't. Not when every night I dreamed of Danny, standing at the edge of the trees, pointing me deeper in. His eyes were always hidden in shadow, but I knew he wanted me to follow, so I did. I started sneaking out at dusk, walking along the same tracks where I'd last seen him. The rails had already started to rust, the ties swallowed by weeds. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the earth was warning me to turn back, but I couldn't. Guilt had a leash around my throat, pulling me forward. That night, the air was thick with mist. The woods pressed close on either side, black shapes shifting in the corner of my vision. I carried a flashlight, but the beam barely cut through the fog. Every crack of a branch, every ripple of leaves made me pause. I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of finding Danny or not finding anything at all. I don't know how long I walked before I saw it. A break in the trees I'd never noticed before. The path was narrow, choked with vines, but it was there, leading off the tracks and deeper into the woods. I should have kept walking. I should have told myself it was nothing. But something in my chest pulled me toward it. Like maybe this was what Danny had been pointing to all along. I pushed through the brush, branches clawing at my arms. The air grew colder with every step. The sounds of the world faded until all I could hear was my own breathing. And then, suddenly, the trees opened up. I stumbled into a clearing. It wasn't big, maybe 20 feet across, a circle of bare earth in the middle of the woods. The ground was strangely smooth, like it had been cleared on purpose. No grass, no weeds, just dirt, dark and damp. The air smelled metallic, sharp in my nose. At first I thought it was empty. Then my flashlight beam caught something in the dirt. I froze. It was Danny's baseball cap, the same faded blue cap he wore the day he disappeared, lying on its side like someone had just dropped it. My throat tightened. I crouched down, my hand trembling as I picked it up. The fabric was damp, but not rotted, not weathered by weeks in the rain. It looked fresh. Too fresh. My heart hammered as the beam swept further across the clearing. That's when I saw Mora's shoe. A backpack. A torn scrap of fabric I recognized as his striped shirt, all scattered like breadcrumbs across the dirt. My breath came fast and shallow. I wanted to scream, to run back and tell someone, anyone, but my legs wouldn't move. My eyes kept darting from one item to the next, every piece a reminder of the boy I'd left behind. And then I realized something that made my stomach twist. There were no leaves, no twigs, no fallen branches littering the clearing. The ground was bare except for Danny's things, as if the forest itself had been swept clean to make room for them. I tried to back away, but my foot caught on something. I looked down, expecting another shoe or scrap of clothing. It wasn't. It was a mark, carved into the dirt, thin lines forming a circle, patterns curling inward like spirals. Not random scratches, something deliberate. Symbols I didn't recognize etched deep into the earth. My chest tightened. The flashlight trembled in my hand, and that's when I felt it. The air shifted. It wasn't the wind. It was heavier than that, like the whole clearing exhaled at once. The trees groaned. The mist thickened. And in that silence, I felt it. A presence. Watching me, every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't see anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. My skin crawled with the certainty of eyes on me, hidden just beyond the circle of light. I forced myself to speak, though my voice cracked. "Danny?" The sound of his name echoed back, warped, stretched, like it had traveled too far. My blood went cold. The shadows between the trees seemed to ripple. I thought I saw a figure, small, hunched, standing just beyond the clearing. My heart leapt into my throat. I raised the flashlight, but the beam only hit mist and branches. The shape was gone. That's when I heard it, a laugh, soft, almost like a child's giggle floating from the darkness. But it wasn't right. It was too thin, too hollow, as if it came from a throat that hadn't laughed in years. I dropped the cap and bolted. Branches whipped my face as I tore through the undergrowth, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I didn't stop to catch my breath, didn't stop to look back. The sound of that laugh chased me, growing fainter only when the tracks came into view again. When I finally stumbled home, gasping, mud streaked up my legs, I told no one. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But how could I explain what I'd seen? How could I tell Danny's mom that her boy's belongings were sitting in a clearing that felt wrong? She wanted hope. The whole town wanted answers. But what I found out there wasn't an answer. It was something else. Something I wasn't ready to understand. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the clearing, the circle carved into the dirt, the way the air seemed to breathe. And that laugh, thin, echoing, curling into my skull. But the worst part wasn't the memory. The worst part was what I found the next morning, sitting on my porch. Danny's cap, the same one I dropped when I ran, clean, dry, resting neatly against the door like someone had placed it there, waiting for me to find. And I knew then, with a certainty that hollowed me out, whatever was in those woods had followed me home. College was supposed to be the best years of my life. That's what people kept telling me before I moved into the dorms. Freedom, late nights, parties, all of that. And maybe it was like that for some people, but not for me. Not after what happened with Emily. She was my first roommate. We'd only known each other for a few weeks, but it felt like longer. She had this sharp laugh, the kind that cut through a crowded cafeteria, and she never seemed afraid of anyone. I was quieter, more reserved. I liked to keep my head down, study, do my work. She was the opposite, always dragging me into things I wouldn't have done on my own, and then one night she just never came back. It was a Thursday. I remember because we both had early classes the next morning. She'd been restless all day, pacing around the room, checking her phone over and over. Finally, just before midnight, she grabbed her coat. "I'm going out for a walk," she said. "Where?" I asked. She just shrugged, half smiling like it was nothing. "Nowhere. Just need some air." I offered to go with her, but she shook her head. "Don't wait up," she said. And then the door shut behind her, and I was alone. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People came and went from the dorms all the time. But when I woke up the next morning, her bed was still made, the sheets untouched. Her phone charger was still plugged in, her sneakers still by the door. I told myself she'd just crashed at a friend's place, but when the sun went down again and she still hadn't come back, the unease settled in my chest. By the third day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called her parents. I called her friends. Nobody knew where she was. Some hadn't even seen her all week. That's when the police got involved. They asked me everything. What time she left. What she was wearing. Did she say anything strange before she went out? I told them the truth, or at least what I remembered. But the more I repeated it, the less certain I became. Had she really smiled, or was it more of a grimace? Did she actually say, "Don't wait up"? Or did I imagine that later? Memory is slippery like that. It shifts when you're under pressure. And suddenly I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth at all. Days turned into weeks. Posters went up around campus, Emily's face smiling from every wall and lamppost. Students whispered about it in the hallways, turning their heads when I walked past. Some pitied me. Others looked at me like I knew more than I was saying. I didn't blame them. Sometimes I wondered the same thing myself, because the truth is, there are pieces of that night I can't explain. I remember lying in bed after she left, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater. I must have dozed off, but I woke to a sound, a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. I thought it was the window, but when I looked, the blinds were still. The tapping came again, sharper this time. Not the window. The door. Someone was tapping at our door. I sat up, my throat dry, my chest pounding. I wanted to call out, but something stopped me. I crept closer instead, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. I don't know how long I stood there, holding my breath. Eventually, I backed away and crawled under the covers, telling myself it was just the pipes, or someone playing a prank. But in my gut, I knew it wasn't. I never told the police about that, or anyone. It felt like a detail too strange to explain. And besides, how could I prove it? It was just a sound in the dark, but after Emily vanished, the sounds didn't stop. At first it was little things, soft footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, whispers I couldn't make out drifting through the vent. Once I came back from class and found her desk chair pulled out, her notebook open, as if she'd just stepped away for a moment. I told myself it was stress, my brain filling in the gaps, but sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up and swear I heard breathing. Not my own. The police never found her. Not a trace. It was like she stepped out into the night and dissolved. Her parents moved her things out of our dorm after a month. I watched them pack her clothes into boxes, her posters into tubes, their faces hollow like the life had been drained out of them. When they left, the room felt wrong. Empty in a way I can't describe. I thought having the space to myself would help, but it only made things worse. At night, I'd hear the bed springs creak from her side, as if someone had just sat down. Sometimes I'd wake to find her blanket pulled back, rumpled like she'd been lying there. Once her lamp turned on by itself in the middle of the night, flooding the room with harsh yellow light. I sat frozen, staring at the empty bed, the shadows crowding the corners, and always, I wondered if she'd really just gone for a walk, or if she'd come back somehow, in a way I couldn't understand. People stopped asking me about her after a while. New students came in, new stories pushed the old ones aside. But I never forgot. I couldn't. Because every time I looked at the door, I remembered the sound of those faint taps, 3 of them, slow, careful, like someone who didn't want to be heard. And sometimes, when I lie awake now years later, I still hear them. I can still remember the last thing she said to me. It wasn't anything important. Nothing like the kind of last words you'd imagine holding on to forever. Just 4 small words that felt harmless at the time. But now they echo in my head night after night. Don't wait up. That's what Emily said before she left. She smiled when she said it, but it wasn't her usual smile. It didn't reach her eyes. We'd been roommates for just over a month. Freshman year, shoved together by chance, the way most people are. She was bold, talkative, the type of person who filled silence without even trying. I was the opposite. Quiet, cautious, careful with everything I said. But somehow we worked. She dragged me out of my comfort zone, and I gave her someone who would actually listen. That Thursday night had been like any other at first. She'd been restless, pacing our small dorm room with her phone in her hand, tapping her nails against the plastic case. I asked her what was wrong, but she just shrugged. Said she needed some air. It was almost midnight when she grabbed her coat. Now? You've got an 8 a.m. tomorrow, I reminded her. She didn't answer right away, just stood there in the doorway, like she was weighing something in her mind. Then she gave me that half smile and said it, "Don't wait up," before pulling the door shut behind her. I thought she'd be back in half an hour at most. But when I woke up the next morning, her bed was untouched. Her shoes were still lined up by the door. Her laptop was on the desk. Her phone charger was plugged into the wall. It was like she'd stepped out for a second and vanished into thin air. At first, I didn't panic. I told myself she'd stayed with a friend or maybe she'd met someone. It wasn't unusual for college kids to crash somewhere else. But by the second day, when no one had seen her in class, the unease began to eat at me. By the third day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called her parents. I called the few friends of hers I had numbers for. No one knew where she was. No one had heard from her. The police were contacted soon after. They questioned me, of course. I was the last person to see her. They wanted every detail. What time she left. What she was wearing. What she said. I told them everything I remembered. But the more I tried to explain, the less sure I became. Did she really smile when she said those words? Or was it more like a grimace? Did she actually tell me not to wait up? Or had I imagined that later, when my memory started to blur with fear? The more I repeated the story, the stranger it felt. Like I was rehearsing lines from a play I didn't understand. And there was one thing I didn't tell them. One detail I've never told anyone. After she left that night, I didn't fall asleep right away. I lay there in the dark, staring at the glow of the alarm clock, listening to the hum of the heater. That's when I heard it. Faint footsteps in the hallway outside. Not unusual at first. People wandered the dorms at night. But something about the rhythm caught my attention. Slow, deliberate, almost as if whoever it was wanted to be heard. The steps stopped right outside our door. I held my breath. Then came the sound. 3 soft taps, fingernails against wood. I froze. I thought about calling out, but something in me said not to. I crept out of bed and pressed my ear against the door. Silence. When I finally opened it, the hallway was empty. I told myself it was nothing. A joke, a random sound I misunderstood. But deep down, I knew better. I knew someone had been there, waiting. And I can't shake the thought that Emily wasn't walking alone that night. After her disappearance, the campus shifted. Flyers with her photo were taped to walls and poles, her smile frozen in glossy paper. Students whispered when I passed, some with pity, others with suspicion. I caught them staring, wondering if I knew more than I was saying. Sometimes I wondered the same thing, because things in our room changed. I'd come back from class to find her desk chair pulled out, her notebook open, her pen resting across the page. Once, her jewelry box sat on the windowsill, though I knew she'd always kept it in the drawer. At night, I'd hear soft creaks from her bed, like someone shifting their weight on the mattress. Once her lamp flicked on by itself, bathing the room in harsh yellow light. I sat frozen, staring at the empty space where she used to sleep. The police never found her. Not a single trace. No witnesses. No security footage. Nothing. It was like she'd been erased. Her parents came after a month to collect her things. I watched as they packed her clothes into boxes, folded her sheets, rolled up the posters she'd hung on the wall. Their faces looked hollow, emptied out by grief. When they left, I thought the room would feel bigger. Instead, it felt smaller, tighter. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. And still, the sounds didn't stop. Some nights, I'd wake to soft breathing in the dark, so close it made the hair on my arms stand up. Other times, I'd hear footsteps pacing, stopping right outside the door. Always the same 3 taps followed, slow, careful. I told myself it was stress, my mind trying to fill the emptiness she'd left behind. But deep down, I knew the truth. She never came back that night, but something else did. And even now, years later, when I'm lying awake in the dark, I swear I still hear it. The quiet footsteps in the hall, stopping at my door. And then, 3 taps, as if someone's still waiting to be let in. The strangest thing about losing someone isn't the silence they leave behind. It's the way their absence begins to play tricks on your memory. At first, the police questioned me like I was a witness. Later, I think they started to see me as something else. A suspect. They asked about my relationship with Emily. Did we get along? Had we argued? Did she ever seem scared of me? I answered everything honestly. Yes, we got along. No, we didn't argue. Scared of me? No, at least, not that I ever noticed. But when you sit in that cramped little office under buzzing fluorescent lights, with 2 detectives staring at you like they're waiting for you to slip up, you start to question yourself. Did we really get along as well as I thought? Did I miss something in her tone, in her expression? Was there some small sign that she didn't feel safe around me? The more they asked, the less certain I became. I told them about that night. How she paced the room. How she left near midnight. How she told me not to wait up. One of the detectives leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the table. He asked me to repeat it again. Every time I told the story, he stopped me. He pressed for details. What was she wearing? A dark coat. Which one? The long one. I think. You think? I faltered. I could see the coat in my mind, but suddenly I wasn't sure if that was memory or imagination. What time did she leave? Almost midnight. Almost. Or exactly? I said almost. But the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. Like he could see right through me. Like even my pauses were evidence of guilt. They asked if she had a boyfriend, if she was seeing anyone. I told them I didn't know. That felt wrong to admit. We'd lived together for weeks, and yet I couldn't answer the simplest questions about her life. I tried to explain what I did remember, that she seemed restless, unsettled, that she didn't tell me where she was going. But the more I spoke, the more my words tangled. At one point, I caught myself saying she smiled when she left. But later, when I thought about it alone in the dorm room, I realized I wasn't sure if she'd smiled at all. Maybe I just wanted to believe she had. I began to doubt myself, my memory, my mind. Every night I'd lie awake staring at the empty bed beside mine. The longer it stayed empty, the less real she seemed to me. I'd start to wonder if she'd ever been there at all. Her side of the room had become a kind of stage set, her desk frozen in the same half-finished state, her bed made, her books stacked. Nothing moved unless I touched it, and yet, sometimes I swear I heard her, soft movements at night, the creak of mattress springs, the faint sound of breathing. Once I woke up in the dark and reached out half asleep, convinced she was there. My hand brushed the cold sheets and I came fully awake, staring at the empty space. It was like my body remembered her more than my mind did. The police kept coming back, pressing with new questions, circling the same ground. Each time I grew less confident in my answers. Did she leave through the front door or the side entrance? Did I hear her footsteps fade down the hall, or did I only assume she walked away? And what about the knocks? The 3 soft taps I'd heard at the door after she left. I never mentioned them. I couldn't. It sounded insane, and if I admitted that, I was sure they'd twist it into proof of something dark inside me. But it lingered in my head, heavy and undeniable. Those knocks were real, and sometimes, when I lay awake at night, I'd hear them again, not in memory, but in the present, right outside the door. 3 slow taps like someone waiting. I never opened the door again, not after the first time. The detectives asked about Emily's friends. I gave them names where I could, but each time they called, the answers were the same. No one had seen her. No one knew where she'd gone. Her parents returned to campus once more, meeting with the police. I couldn't look at them. Their grief was unbearable, and their questions were worse. They asked if she'd seemed troubled, if she'd ever said anything to me. I shook my head, helpless. But inside, something gnawed at me. a memory I couldn't shake. It wasn't the night she disappeared, but the week before. We'd been in our room late, the window cracked open. She'd been sitting on her bed, scrolling her phone, when suddenly she froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I listened. At first, I heard nothing. Then, a faint noise outside. Footsteps on the gravel path below our window. We lived on the 3rd floor. The dorms were set back from the main walkways. Hardly anyone passed there at night. We sat in silence, listening. The steps paused, then continued slower this time, almost like whoever it was wanted us to notice. I tried to laugh it off, but Emily's face had gone pale. She shut the window, locked it, and pulled the curtain closed. She didn't say anything else. And I didn't press her. Now I wish I had, because the more the police questioned me, the more that moment returned. The way she looked, not just scared, but trapped, like she'd already been living in fear, and I hadn't even seen it. And the worst part? Sometimes I think she tried to tell me. The restless pacing, the way she hesitated before leaving that night, the strange smile that didn't touch her eyes. Maybe she knew she was being followed. Maybe she knew something was going to happen. And maybe, deep down, I did too. But when I try to replay it, when I try to reconstruct every detail, it feels like sand slipping through my fingers. What time was it exactly? What words did she use? Did she actually say, "Don't wait up"? Or have I convinced myself of that over time? I don't know anymore. I just know that her bed is still empty. And sometimes, late at night, I look over and swear I see the covers shifting, as if someone's lying there, turning in their sleep. I close my eyes. I tell myself I'm imagining it, but deep down, I know that emptiness doesn't stay empty. Something always fills it. And whatever has taken her place, it isn't Emily. There are certain places that don't exist on any map. At least not really. They might show up as a name, a little dot along the highway. But if you try to go looking for them, you'll never find what you expect. For me, that place was exit 47. I'd never even heard of it before that night. I was driving alone, late, on a stretch of highway that seemed to stretch forever through the flat, empty land. It was one of those roads where the lines blur together and the darkness swallows everything except the 2 lanes of light your headlights carve out. I shouldn't have been out there alone. I know that now. But back then, I was just trying to make it home. It was close to midnight when my car began to sputter. At first, it was just a stutter in the engine, the kind you tell yourself is nothing. But within minutes, the sound grew worse. A deep, choking noise, like the car itself was trying to breathe through water. Then, without warning, the engine cut out completely. I managed to coast to the shoulder, the headlights flickering, the dashboard lights fading to black. And just like that, I was stranded. The silence hit me hardest. Out there in the middle of nowhere, silence isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. It pressed in from every direction, broken only by the faint ping of the cooling engine. I tried my phone, of course. No signal, not even a single bar. That was when I noticed the sign. Half hidden in the darkness, just up ahead, was an old green highway marker. I had to squint to read it in the faint glow from my headlights. Exit 47. 2 miles I'd driven that route before, but I didn't remember an exit 47. Still, what choice did I have? Sitting in the dark with a dead car didn't feel like an option. I grabbed my jacket, locked the car, and started walking. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for that time of year. The kind of cold that made your breath hang in the air like smoke. The road was empty in both directions. No headlights, no taillights, just me and the sound of my footsteps on the gravel shoulder. 2 miles doesn't sound far, but when you're walking it alone at night, it stretches on forever. The exit appeared suddenly, a sloping ramp that dipped down into darkness. There were no overhead lights, no signs of life, just the faint outline of another green sign at the bottom. As I got closer, I saw it was pointing toward a small town I'd never heard of. The name was worn off, faded almost completely, but beneath it, in block letters, was a single word. Gassy followed the ramp down. At the bottom, the road curved sharply, leading into what looked like a truck stop. A single building squatted in the middle of an empty lot, its roof half collapsed, its windows dark. A rusted sign out front creaked in the wind. I don't know why. but the place unsettled me instantly. It wasn't just abandoned, it felt wrong, like it had been waiting there. I told myself to turn back, to wait with my car until morning. But then I saw it, the faint glow of a light through one of the windows. I froze. It wasn't bright, just a weak, flickering glow like a lantern or an old fluorescent bulb. But in that moment, it was hope. I stepped into the lot, gravel crunching under my shoes. The silence seemed to deepen the closer I got. The door to the building was half open, hanging crooked on its hinges. I hesitated, then pushed it wider. The smell hit me first. Stale air, mixed with something sour and metallic. The kind of smell that clings to the back of your throat. Inside, the place was gutted. Rows of empty shelves stretched across the floor, coated in dust. Faded posters peeled from the walls. A counter stood at the far end, its glass cracked, a register long since dead. And yet, the light was real. A bare bulb swung gently from a cord above the counter, flickering every few seconds. I stood there staring at it, my skin crawling. Someone had to have turned it on. Hello? My voice sounded too loud in the empty space. Is anyone here? Silence. I waited, straining to hear even the faintest movement. Nothing. That was when I saw the board. Pinned to the wall near the counter was an old cork board, yellowed with age. At first, I thought it was covered in newspaper clippings. But as I got closer, I realized what it really was. Missing persons flyers, dozens of them. The paper was curled at the edges, the ink faded, but the faces stared back at me. Men, women, children, smiling portraits frozen in time. Each one with the same word printed across the top in bold letters. Missingi felt my stomach drop. Some of the flyers looked old, decades old. But others were newer. Too new? My eyes landed on one near the center. The corners were still sharp. The ink still dark. The date at the bottom, less than a year ago. A young man, maybe 20, smiling in his driver's license photo, last seen near Highway Exit 47. I stumbled back, my hand gripping the edge of the counter. The bulb above me flickered again, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. I wasn't supposed to be there. I knew it then, deep in my bones. I turned toward the door. That's when I heard it. A low hum. Faint at first, then louder, closer. The unmistakable sound of an engine. Headlights swept across the broken windows, flooding the room with white light before vanishing again. A truck had pulled into the lot. I froze, my body screaming at me to hide, but my legs refusing to move. The engine idled for a moment, then cut off. The silence returned, heavier than before. I listened, barely breathing. The crunch of footsteps on gravel. Slow, measured. They stopped just outside the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the door creaked wider. I couldn't see the person, not yet. Just the edge of a shadow stretched across the floor. And in that moment, I realized the mistake I'd made. My car breaking down wasn't an accident. Exit 47 wasn't a coincidence. It was a place people disappeared. A place no one came back from. And now, I was part of it. I thought I was about to die. When the door creaked open and that shadow stretched across the floor, every part of me was braced for something terrible. I held my breath, waiting for whoever was outside to step in. But instead, a voice broke the silence. "You lost, kid?" It wasn't what I expected. Not deep or menacing, not cruel, just tired. A man stepped inside, pushing the door the rest of the way open. He looked like he belonged there, like he'd grown out of the place. His shirt was oil-stained, his hair was slicked back, and his face was carved with lines that came from years of squinting at the sun. He had the look of someone who'd seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. For a moment, I just stared at him, too stunned to answer. My car broke down, I finally managed. My voice cracked. "Back on the highway. I thought I saw a light here." He nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed something he already knew. His eyes flicked toward the bulb above the counter. "Yeah, that thing's been flickering on and off for years. Don't even notice it half the time." He walked past me like I wasn't even there and ducked behind the counter. I noticed his limp, subtle, but every step seemed to hurt. He reached under the counter and pulled out a flashlight, setting it down with a dull thud. You're lucky you made it here, he said. I laughed nervously, trying to play it off. Doesn't feel too lucky. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and the expression on his face wiped away any attempt at humor. His eyes were sharp, serious, and filled with something I didn't recognize at first. Fear. Listen, he said, you don't leave this place after dark. Not if you want to make it back. At first I thought he was joking, but his tone was deadly serious. What do you mean? I asked. He leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning beneath him. He rubbed a hand across his jaw like he was debating how much to tell me. You saw the board, didn't you? He asked quietly. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to admit it, but I nodded. Those people didn't just disappear, he said. They were taken. This place, this whole exit, it ain't right. Been like that for as long as I can remember. I felt the air grow colder around me. Taken by who? He shook his head. Not who. What? The silence stretched out between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I forced myself to speak. So what do I do? I can't just sit here all night. You can, he said. And you should. Stay inside until morning. When the sun's up, it's safer. Not safe exactly, but safer. His voice cracked slightly on that last word, like he didn't even believe it himself. I wanted to argue, to tell him I couldn't wait, that I needed to get back to my car, but something in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was warning me, and I believed him. I sat down at one of the dusty tables near the counter. The silence of the place pressed in on me again. But now it felt different. Not empty, watchful. Like the darkness outside the windows was listening. The attendant busied himself with something behind the counter, though I noticed his hands shook slightly as he worked. After a while, he spoke again. You hear them yet? I frowned. Hear who? He didn't answer. He just tilted his head like he was listening for something distant. I strained my ears, trying to catch whatever he meant. At first, there was nothing. Just the faint buzz of the flickering bulb. But then, so faint, I thought I imagined it. I heard something. A sound carried on the wind. Voices. They were far away, but clear. Dozens of them, maybe more. Some laughing. Some crying. Some whispering words I couldn't make out. I shivered. What is that? I whispered. The attendant's face was grim. Those are the ones who didn't make it. I felt my throat close.
You mean?
The missing people? He nodded once. The voices grew louder for a moment, then faded, swallowed again by the night. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake off the chill. Why don't you leave? If you know what's happening here, why stay? He gave a bitter laugh. Leave? You think I haven't tried? Every time I go, I end up right back here. Doesn't matter which road I take. Doesn't matter how far I drive. This place, it won't let me go. I didn't know what to say to that. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, but nothing fit. Finally, I whispered, So I'm stuck too? He studied me for a long time before answering. Maybe, maybe not. Some people make it out, but they don't come out the same. The bulb flickered again, plunging the room into near darkness for a split second before sputtering back to life. The attendant's voice dropped to a whisper. Whatever you do, don't open that door again tonight, no matter what you hear. I swallowed hard, nodding. The rest of the night stretched out endlessly. I sat at the table, listening to the wind rattle the broken sign outside, the creak of the building settling. Every so often, I thought I heard footsteps just beyond the door. Soft, deliberate, and once I swear I heard someone call my name, but I remembered his warning. No matter what you hear. By the time the first pale light of dawn filtered through the windows, I was half asleep, my body stiff, my nerves raw. The attendant was still behind the counter, eyes bloodshot, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. You made it, he said quietly. I didn't answer. I was too exhausted, too hollow. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay there. And yet, deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever lived in the shadows of Exit 47 wasn't finished with me yet. I didn't leave the gas station right away. The sun had risen, weak and pale, and the light through those dirty windows felt more like a suggestion than a promise. The attendant, he never told me his name, just watched me as I gathered myself, his eyes heavy, like he already knew what I was about to do. "You'll go anyway," he said. I froze. He leaned back in his chair, the cigarette in his hand burning down to a crooked nub. They always do. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the weight in his voice told me I already knew. I couldn't stay there. Not in that place. Not after what I'd heard during the night. Those voices! They were still in my head, whispering when I closed my eyes. So I walked out. The morning air hit me sharp and cold. My car was still down the road, maybe a half mile, maybe more. The stretch of asphalt between me and it looked endless. The world felt stretched too thin, like if I looked long enough I'd see the seams. I started walking. Every step felt louder than it should have been. My shoes scuffed the gravel, and the sound echoed down the empty highway like I was being followed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the road behind me stayed empty, shimmering faintly in the morning heat that hadn't even arrived yet. When I finally reached my car, relief washed over me. But it didn't last. The hood was still up, the same way I'd left it, but something was different. The dust on the windshield had been smeared, as if someone had dragged their hand across it during the night. My heart thudded hard in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Just dirt, just wind. I slid into the driver's seat, the stale air pressing close around me, and twisted the key. Nothing. The engine coughed once, then fell silent. I tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. That was when I saw the rest area sign. A green metal sign across the road, half hidden by weeds and leaning to one side. I could have sworn it hadn't been there yesterday. Rest area, 2 miles. That was it. No arrows, no lights. Just those words, faded and peeling. I told myself I'd find help there. Maybe a payphone, maybe another car, anything. So I left my car behind and started walking again. The highway stretched on, empty and endless. The sun was higher now, but it didn't make me feel safer. If anything, the light made the shadows sharper, cutting across the cracked asphalt in strange shapes that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. When I finally reached the rest area, I knew something was wrong. It sat low in the trees. A squat concrete building with faded blue restroom signs bolted to the walls. A row of vending machines stood outside, their glass cracked, their insides dark. A few picnic tables were scattered near the tree line, the wood rotted and splintered. At first, it looked abandoned, but then I saw the cars, 3 of them, parked in a neat row off to the side. The windows were dusty, the tires sagging. They hadn't been driven in years. I walked closer, my skin crawling. Inside one of the cars, the driver's seat was stained dark, the fabric shredded. A child's shoe lay in the back seat, turned on its side. I couldn't breathe. The building's door was propped open, just slightly. A shadow stretched across the concrete floor inside, and for a second I thought I saw someone move. "Hello?" I called out, my voice thin and uncertain. No answer. I should have turned back right then, but something pulled me forward. A heaviness in my chest, like invisible hands pressing me on. The air inside was cooler, damp, and smelled faintly of mildew and iron. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, though half of them were dead. The hallway split in 2 directions, men and women. The silence was so thick I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. That was when I heard it. Voice, soft, distant, calling my name. I froze. The sound was coming from the men's restroom. I took 1 step forward, then another. My shoes squeaked against the damp floor. Inside, the room looked normal at first. Stalls, sinks, cracked mirrors. But the farther I went, the more wrong it became. The tiles near the back wall were broken, jagged, as if something had forced its way through from beneath, and that was where the voice was coming from. My name again, whispered through the cracks in the floor. I dropped to my knees, staring at the darkness between the broken tiles. The smell of iron was stronger here, sharp and metallic. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move, because something was moving down there. Pale fingers, impossibly long, curling up through the cracks. The skin looked stretched too thin, almost translucent, veins dark beneath it. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices now, calling not just my name, but others too. Names I'd seen on that board back at the gas station. The fingers flexed, reaching, scrabbling against the tile. And then, something else. An eye. It blinked up at me from the darkness, wide and wet, the iris a color I can't describe. Not blue, not green, not anything human. It was watching me. I stumbled back, my hands scraping the floor. The voices rose, a chorus of begging, laughing, screaming, and then the floor shifted. The cracks widened, the tiles buckling, and for one horrifying moment, I thought the whole room would collapse into whatever was beneath. I bolted. I don't even remember getting back to the door. I just remember the sunlight hitting me like a slap, my lungs burning as I sprinted past the dead cars, past the vending machines, back up the highway. I didn't stop, not once. By the time I reached my car again, my chest felt like it was going to cave in. I collapsed against the door, gasping for air, and that was when I saw it. The smear on the windshield was gone, but in its place, drawn into the dust as if by a fingertip, were words, "Don't leave." I stared at them, my whole body shaking, and that was when the engine turned over on its own. The car roared to life, the hood still up, no key in the ignition. I didn't get inside. I couldn't. I just stood there staring until the sound cut off as suddenly as it had started. Silence fell again. The highway stretched on in both directions, empty, endless, and I knew then what the attendant had meant. This place doesn't let people go. Not really, and sooner or later, it won't let me go either. I can still see the lake when I close my eyes. The water was so still that first day, smooth as glass, reflecting the sky like it was trying to fool us into thinking it was safe. My parents were excited. They'd been talking about this trip for months, a whole summer away from the city, tucked inside some quiet rental by the lake. "Good for the family," my mom said. "A fresh start," my dad added. I didn't want a fresh start. I just wanted to be anywhere else. The house sat at the very end of a dirt road, far away from anything that looked like civilization. 2 stories, faded white paint peeling from the siding, a long porch that sagged in the middle like it was tired. It looked more tired than abandoned, like a place that had seen too many summers and not enough repairs. When we pulled up, the air was heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. My younger brother jumped out of the car before we even stopped rolling, already running toward the dock that stretched out into the water. His laughter echoed across the lake. I stayed behind, my hand on the car door, staring at the house. Something about it made me uneasy. The windows looked like eyes, dark, watching. Inside, it was even worse. The air was stale, as though no one had opened the place in years. Dust clung to the curtains. The wooden floors creaked with every step. The furniture looked like it belonged to another era, heavy, carved pieces that made the rooms feel smaller. "This is perfect," my mom said, spinning slowly in the living room like she was showing it off to an invisible audience. "Needs some work," my dad muttered, eyeing a water stain on the ceiling. I wandered upstairs. The bedrooms were lined along a narrow hallway. Mine had a window overlooking the lake, which might have been nice if I hadn't already noticed the way the water seemed darker near the center, almost black. At dinner that night, we sat on the porch eating takeout from the only diner in town. The sky turned gold, then pink, and finally settled into the deep blue of night. The lake reflected every shade. It should have been beautiful, but I couldn't shake the thought that it was hiding something. That was when the neighbors stopped by, an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Duncan. They lived year-round on the opposite side of the lake. Friendly enough, but there was a stiffness in their smiles. Mrs. Duncan's eyes lingered on me for a moment too long. "You folks just renting?" she asked. My dad nodded. "For the summer." She glanced at the water before speaking again. "Kids ought to be careful near the lake. People have gone missing over the years." Her husband cleared his throat sharply, but she didn't look at him. She just kept staring at me. "Missing." I laughed a little, awkward, waiting for her to say she was joking. But she didn't. Instead, Mr. Duncan put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Don't go filling their heads with stories." He gave us a polite smile and steered her back down the porch steps. When they were gone, the silence they left behind felt heavier than before. That night, lying in my bed, I thought about what she said. People had gone missing. I told myself she probably meant accidents. Kids swimming out too far, maybe boats tipping over. That happened at lakes all the time, right? But then I heard it, a splash, loud enough to carry through my open window. I sat up, staring out at the dark water. The moon was bright, laying a silver path across the lake's surface. But there was nothing. No ripples, no movement, just stillness. I lay back down, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same thought. If people had gone missing here, had their bodies ever been found? Or were they still down there beneath the water waiting? The next morning, my brother begged my parents to let him swim. My dad agreed, but told him to stay near the dock. I watched from the porch as he splashed in the shallows, laughing, water glistening on his skin. My mom called out to me, telling me to join him, but I shook my head. Something about the water felt wrong. Too dark, too still. When my brother finally climbed out, shivering and dripping, I noticed something. His arm was scratched, thin red lines running across his skin like he'd brushed against something sharp. "What happened?" I asked. He frowned, looking down. "Nothing. Just the lake. Just the lake." Later that day, I walked down to the dock alone. The boards creaked under my feet. The water lapped gently against the posts, but there was no breeze. I crouched down and looked closer. The lake wasn't clear, not even at the edge. It was murky, almost black, swallowing the light. I couldn't see more than a few inches beneath the surface, and then I thought I saw something move. Not a fish. Bigger. Slower. It sank out of sight before I could be sure. That night at dinner, I asked my parents about what Mrs. Duncan said, about the people who went missing. My mom frowned, but my dad brushed it off. "Old rumors," he said. "Every small town has them. Don't go scaring your brother." But I couldn't let it go. When everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs. The floor groaned under my weight, but no one stirred. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The air cool against my skin. The lake stretched out before me. Dark and endless, and I swear I saw something standing in the water, far out, near the middle, a shape, a figure, too still to be a swimmer. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of the moonlight, my tired eyes, my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. The Duncans hadn't been warning us for no reason. This lake had secrets, and we had just moved into its house. The lake had a way of pulling people in. By the second week, our cousin Ryan had joined us for the summer. He was older than me, 17, and full of the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no. He wasn't afraid of anything, or at least that's what he wanted us to think. Ryan loved the dock. From the moment he arrived, he treated it like his throne. He'd sit on the edge with his feet dangling in the water, tossing pebbles into the lake, grinning at the ripples spreading out. He said he liked the quiet, said it felt different out there. I never told him that I hated it. I hated the way the boards groaned under my feet. I hated the way the water swirled beneath, dark and silent like it was waiting. But Ryan wasn't like me. He was restless, always needing to test himself, to push things further. The first time he swam out at night, I thought my heart would stop. It was late, past midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I crept downstairs and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, heavy with the smell of wet pine. That was when I saw him, Ryan, standing at the edge of the dock, shirtless, the moonlight silver on his skin. "What are you doing?" I whispered, my voice carrying across the still water. He looked back at me and grinned. "Going for a swim. It's the middle of the night," I said. "You can't see anything." That's the point, and before I could stop him, he dove in. The splash broke the silence, sending ripples across the smooth surface. I rushed to the edge of the dock, my chest tight, watching as his head bobbed up a few yards out. He shook the water from his hair, laughing. "Come on in," he called. I shook my head. "It's not safe." But he was already swimming farther, each stroke pulling him into deeper water. The moon cast a silver trail across the lake, but the farther he went, the more the dark swallowed him. "Ryan!" I hissed. He waved an arm lazily, like none of this mattered, like I was the one being foolish. Then he disappeared under the surface. I leaned forward, straining to hear. The night pressed in close around me, silent except for the gentle lapping of water against the posts. My hands gripped the edge of the dock so tight my knuckles ached. 1 second, 2, 3. Too long. I opened my mouth to shout, but before the sound came, he burst from the water, gasping, grinning wide. "You should have seen your face," he laughed. Splashing water toward me, I wanted to yell at him, to drag him back onto the dock, but my voice caught in my throat, because while he was laughing, something else rippled the surface behind him. Not a wave, not his doing, a shape, broad, slow, sliding just beneath the water. "Ryan," I whispered. He didn't notice. He wiped his eyes, still laughing. Then he sank down again, treading water casually. I couldn't breathe. The shape passed closer, just under the reflection of the moon. It was gone before I could make sense of it. "Get out," I said finally, my voice cracking. "Get out now." He must have heard something in my tone because the grin faded. He swam back, pulling himself onto the dock, water streaming down his arms. "What's your problem?" he muttered. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say I'd seen something, but the words felt ridiculous in my mouth, so I just shook my head and walked back to the house. That was the first night. The second night, he did it again, and the third. By then, he wasn't even sneaking. He told my parents he liked night swimming, that it cleared his head. My dad warned him to be careful, but didn't stop him. Nobody could stop Ryan. Then came the night he didn't come back. It was hot that evening, too hot to sleep. I lay in bed with the window open, listening to the lake, the faint hum of crickets. Then I heard footsteps creaking down the porch. I sat up, heart pounding, because I already knew who it was. By the time I got to the window, Ryan was a shadow at the end of the dock, the moon glinting off his bare shoulders. "Ryan," I whispered. But he didn't turn. He dove in. The splash echoed. I held my breath, waiting for him to surface. When he did, he floated on his back, arms spread wide, staring at the stars. I almost let myself relax. But then he turned. Swimming farther out, strokes steady, moving toward the darkest part of the lake. "Ryan!" My voice cracked the night too loud. He lifted his head. I think he waved. Or maybe he didn't. It was hard to tell. Then he went under. I waited. Seconds passed. Then a minute. "Ryan!" I screamed. Silence. I tore down the stairs, bursting onto the porch, feet pounding the dock. The boards groaned and shuddered beneath me. I leaned over the edge, staring at the rippling black water. Nothing. No head. No splash. Just silence, deep and endless. I screamed his name again and again until my throat burned. And then, movement. But not him. Something broke the surface. A ripple. Wide and slow, pushing toward the dock. I stumbled back, my legs trembling. The ripple stopped a few feet from me, and for a moment I thought something would rise. But nothing came. The lake went still again. By the time my parents came running, I could barely speak. I tried to explain, tried to tell them what happened, but the words tangled in my throat. They searched. All night, flashlights sweeping across the water, voices echoing over the lake. My dad dove in once, coming up shivering and pale, swearing he felt something brush against his leg. But they didn't find him. Not that night. Not ever. The police came the next day. They asked questions, wrote notes, dragged the lake with boats and ropes. They didn't find him either. The lake doesn't give back what it takes. That night I sat on the dock alone, staring at the water. The moon was full, the surface silver and calm, and then I heard it, a splash, soft, distant, like someone diving in. I leaned forward, my heart thudding. The ripples spread slowly, reaching the dock. And I thought, I swear, I heard my name whispered from beneath the surface. When Ryan vanished, the lake changed. It wasn't just in my head. Everyone felt it, though no one said it out loud. My parents moved slower, quieter, like the air around us had thickened. My aunt cried every morning. Even the neighbors kept their distance, whispering when they thought we couldn't hear. But the loudest silence came from the lake itself. It was always so alive before. The splash of fish, the gentle rocking of the dock, the echo of laughter skipping across the water. Now it felt like a mirror, flat and cold, reflecting nothing but the hollow sky. I couldn't look at it without feeling that something down there was watching back. The police called in divers. I remember the morning they arrived. 2 men in heavy black wetsuits, faces hidden behind masks, tanks strapped to their backs. They looked less like rescuers and more like creatures crawling up from the deep. Their movements were slow, methodical, like they'd done this too many times before. I watched from the dock as they prepared. My dad stood beside me, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He didn't say much, but I could feel the storm rolling inside him. The divers slipped into the water with barely a splash. Then they were gone, swallowed by the surface. The minutes stretched like hours. I stared at the ripples fading across the lake, waiting for them to reappear, my chest tight with the memory of Ryan's last swim. Every second I imagined the black water closing around me, pulling me under. When the divers finally surfaced, it wasn't Ryan they brought back. The first thing they carried to shore wasn't even human. It was a shoe, a muddy sneaker, torn at the heel, the laces tangled like it had been yanked from someone's foot. My aunt collapsed into my mother's arms when she saw it, sobbing Ryan's name. But the divers didn't stop. They went back down again and again. Each time they returned with something stranger, a rusted lunchbox, the paint flaking away, filled with soggy papers and a broken toy car. A pair of glasses, the lenses clouded with silt. A child's backpack, small enough to belong to someone much younger than Ryan. The pile grew on the shore, damp and filthy, each object carrying a weight none of us could name. I felt sick, because none of those things belonged to Ryan. The divers spoke in low voices with the police, pointing to the water, shaking their heads. I crept closer, straining to hear. "Not recent," one said. His voice was muffled through the mask he hadn't fully removed. "Years down there? Maybe decades." The officer scribbled something in his notebook, his face pale. "Then why now?" the other diver asked. He glanced at the lake like it had ears. "Why are they showing up now?" That question hung heavy in the air. Nobody answered. The next dive lasted longer. I couldn't see them beneath the surface, but I could feel it. The lake rippled in strange patterns, spreading out from a single point, like something was moving far below. When they emerged, one of the divers was shaking. He pulled off his mask, gasping, his skin pale as chalk. His partner grabbed his arm, steadying him, but he pushed away, stumbling onto the dock. "There's something down there," he said. His voice cracked like he was confessing a secret. "Something?" the officer asked, frowning. The diver nodded, his hands trembling. "Not a body. Not just junk. It's..." He stopped, looking at the water, then at us, like the words might curse him if he spoke them. "What did you see?" my father demanded. His voice cut sharp across the dock. The diver swallowed. "Rooms," he whispered finally. "Like structures. Not natural, not part of the lake bed. It's like..." His eyes darted back to the water, and his voice lowered even more. "It's like there's something built down there." My stomach turned cold. The officer dismissed it, muttering about shadows and silt and nerves. But I saw the diver's face. He wasn't mistaken. He was terrified. They refused to go back in after that, packed up their gear, loaded their van, and left without another word. The police tried to reassure us. They said lakes swallow things all the time, that currents move objects, that history leaves scars in strange places. But no one believed them. Not really, because the lake was too quiet now, too still, like it had shown us just enough to warn us. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Ryan's laugh in the dark, muffled, distant, as though it was bubbling up from beneath the floorboards. I sat by the window, staring at the reflection of the moon on the lake. And then I saw it. A ripple. Small at first, then spreading wider, reaching toward the dock. No wind, no boats, nothing to disturb the surface. The water moved on its own. Something brushed the posts beneath the dock, making them creak. Then a sound followed. Soft, muffled, like fabric dragging through wet sand. I pressed my face to the glass, heart hammering, and that's when I saw the shadow. It rose just enough to break the surface. A shape, broad, hunched, featureless in the moonlight. It lingered, half submerged like it was listening. Then it sank back down without a sound. The ripple carried to shore, brushing against the sand at my feet. The next morning, the police told us they were scaling back the search. They said there was nothing more they could do, that Ryan was presumed drowned. But I knew better. The lake wasn't done. It had given us pieces, shoes, backpacks, broken toys. But not Ryan. Not yet. It was keeping him. And every time I looked at that black water, I felt the truth press against my chest. He wasn't gone. He was still down there, waiting. I used to think water was harmless, that it only reflected what you gave it. But after that summer, I learned that water doesn't just hold memories, it keeps them. And sometimes it hides them until it decides you're ready to see. Ryan's disappearance should have been the end of it. The police closed the case, the divers refused to come back, and my parents packed our bags earlier than planned. But I couldn't leave. Not yet, because I'd started dreaming about the lake. Every night I heard it calling. Soft at first, like the hum of a refrigerator, then louder, more insistent. In my dreams, I was standing at the dock, looking down, and I could see all the way to the bottom. I saw Ryan drifting there, his arms out, his eyes open, waiting. Around him were others, shapes of children, adults, faces I didn't know. And behind them, deeper still, were walls, dark walls, like the diver said. Structures. I woke each morning drenched in sweat, my throat raw like I'd been screaming underwater. I told myself it was just guilt, my mind playing tricks. But the dreams didn't stop. And then I found something that proved they weren't just dreams. It was the morning we were supposed to leave. I went down to the dock one last time. The air was damp and heavy, the kind of morning where the world feels blurred at the edges. I wanted to sit there, to memorize the sound of the water lapping against the posts, to pretend things were normal. That's when I noticed it. A corner of fabric caught between the planks. At first I thought it was seaweed, but when I pulled it free, my stomach dropped. It was cloth, thin, faded, patterned with little cartoon rockets. I knew that fabric. It was Ryan's pajama top, the one he wore the night he disappeared. I stumbled back, holding it like it was burning me. My dad called from the porch, asking if I was ready, but I couldn't answer. My hands shook and I shoved the shirt into my backpack before anyone could see. I didn't tell them. I couldn't. They needed to believe he was gone. But I knew the truth now. Ryan hadn't drowned. He'd been taken. That night I went back to the dock alone. I waited until the house was dark, until my parents were asleep, then crept out with a flashlight and the shirt in my bag. The moon was high, casting a silver path across the water. I sat on the edge of the dock and held the shirt tight.
"Where are you?"
I whispered. The lake answered, not with words, but with movement. The water rippled, gentle at first, then stronger, circling like something was stirring beneath. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the beam of my flashlight, and then I saw it. Something rising. It wasn't Ryan. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was an object, slick and dripping, breaking the surface. A box. Wooden, swollen from years underwater, covered in moss and slime. It bumped against the dock, rocking with the current, as if the lake itself had pushed it up for me. My hands trembled as I pulled it onto the dock. The lid was warped, but not locked. I pried it open with the edge of my flashlight. Inside were bones, small ones, fragile, too small to be adult. Too many to belong to just one person. Mixed in with them were scraps of fabric, buttons, shoes, the remnants of children. My chest heaved, bile burning the back of my throat. I wanted to throw the box back into the water to pretend I never saw it, but I couldn't, because under the bones, tucked in the corner, was something else. A photo. It was faded, water damaged, but I could still make out the image. A group of kids standing on the dock, smiling. Ryan was among them, but so was I, my breath caught. Because the photo was old, older than me. The clothes, the hairstyles, they weren't from our time. But the boy who looked exactly like me was there, clear as day, staring back from the picture. I dropped it. The wind caught the edges and it skittered across the planks before slipping back into the lake. Panic surged. I shoved the box into the water, watching it sink fast, disappearing beneath the surface like it never existed. But the image of those bones, those tiny shoes, that impossible photograph, it wouldn't leave me. The lake was showing me something, warning me, or maybe claiming me. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps coming for me. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers sliding through the window. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing I had touched something I wasn't supposed to. The next morning, my parents packed the car. My aunt stayed behind, refusing to leave without Ryan, but the rest of us drove away in silence. The trees closed around the road, the lake shrinking behind us. I told myself it was over. That leaving meant escaping, but it didn't. The lake followed me, in mirrors, in puddles, in the dark sheen of my coffee. Whenever I looked too long, I saw ripples moving on their own. I heard faint splashes where there was no water, and every night the dreams came back, stronger. I'd see Ryan at the bottom, reaching for me, his mouth moving in words I couldn't hear. Behind him, the walls rose higher, clearer. Not natural formations, bricks, stacked, built, like there was a whole place down there. A place that didn't belong, and I knew the truth. The disappearances weren't accidents. Something was under that lake. Something built, hidden, waiting. And it was still taking. I still remember the rain that night. Not the kind that pounds and floods, but the thin, endless drizzle that clings to everything. It coated the sidewalks, turned the streetlights into halos, and made the world feel smaller, like the whole city had shrunk into just that bus stop on the corner of 9th and Main. I wasn't supposed to stay that late at work. None of us were, but the deadlines were piling up and I'd lost track of time. By the time I finally shut down my computer, most of the office was already dark. Only Dana was left, sitting at her desk with her headphones in, clicking away like the whole world depended on her getting one more email sent. We left together, her locking up behind us. Dana wasn't exactly my friend. We weren't close enough for that, but she was one of the few people in the office I didn't mind being around. She had this way of making the worst days feel less heavy. The bus stop was only 2 blocks away. By the time we got there, our jackets were damp, and the rain had worked its way into my shoes. The street was empty except for the glow of the corner store across from us and the hum of a vending machine that looked older than both of us combined. I checked the schedule posted on the side of the shelter. "Bus should be here in 10, I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. Dana hugged her bag tighter and nodded. "Good. I'm freezing." We stood there side by side, our reflections stretched and bent in the wet pavement. The traffic lights cycled through their colors even though no cars were coming. Red, green, yellow, red again. It was like the city was running on autopilot, doing its routine whether anyone was watching or not. The rain tapped on the glass of the shelter, steady and soft. A stray dog trotted across the intersection, shook itself, and disappeared into an alley. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. And then there was just us. I don't know when I started to notice it, the wrongness. At first, it was just a thought brushing against the edge of my mind, easy to dismiss. But the longer we waited, the heavier it grew. There were no other people. Not a single car passed. No other commuters hurried by with their umbrellas. The corner store was lit up, but the clerk wasn't moving behind the counter. The city was there, but it wasn't alive. Dana must have felt it too because she whispered, "It's never this empty." I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. "Guess the rain scared everyone away." She didn't laugh. The bus was late. 5 minutes, then 10. I kept checking my phone, refreshing the transit app, but it just spun, loading endlessly, showing nothing. That's when Dana said it. "What if it doesn't come?" I turned to her. "What do you mean?" She kept her eyes on the wet street. "What if the bus just doesn't come tonight?" Her words lodged in me like a splinter. I told myself she was joking, but her tone wasn't playful. It was flat, heavy, like she already knew the answer. I shoved my hands into my pockets and tried to ignore the way my stomach tightened. The rain fell harder for a moment, drumming on the shelter roof, then softened again. I glanced at the corner store. Still lit, but the clerk hadn't moved an inch. He was just standing behind the counter, facing forward like a mannequin. I looked away fast. Dana sighed and leaned against the glass. "You ever notice how time feels different here? Like waiting makes it stretch?" I nodded, but I didn't want to agree. Because she was right. Time wasn't moving right. My phone screen still said 12:14 a.m., even though I'd checked it at least 4 times. The bus should have come by now. The sound of an engine broke the silence, faint at first, then louder. Relief washed through me as headlights appeared at the far end of the street. The bus. Finally. We both straightened up, stepping closer to the curb, our bags clutched tight. The lights grew brighter, the engine louder, the shape of the bus forming through the rain. But then, it didn't slow down. It passed right by. Empty. No driver. No passengers. Just rows of vacant seats and dark windows sliding past like a dream I couldn't wake from. I shouted, waving my arms, but it didn't matter. The bus rolled on, silent except for the hiss of its tires on wet asphalt, and disappeared into the dark. Dana's hand clamped around my arm. Her grip was ice cold. "Did you see?" I saw. My throat was dry. It was empty. She didn't let go. We stood there frozen, staring after it. The sound of the engine fading into nothing. The city was silent again. Then Dana whispered something that chilled me more than the rain ever could. That wasn't our bus. Her words hung in the air, heavy and certain. And when I turned to look at her, she wasn't looking at the road. She was staring at the corner store. The clerk was gone. The counter was empty, the lights still humming, but no one inside. Something shifted deep in my chest then. A knowing, a weight, like we weren't waiting for a bus anymore. Like we were waiting for something else entirely. I told Dana we should walk, find a cab, anything. But she shook her head, her eyes fixed on the street. "No, we have to wait." "For what?" I asked. Her voice was barely audible. "For the right one." The rain picked up again, louder now, drowning out my racing thoughts. I checked my phone. 12:14 a.m. Still, the traffic lights cycled, red. Green, yellow, red. The world moved, but we weren't in it anymore. I wanted to run. I should have run. But something about the way Dana stood there, calm and certain, kept me rooted. My breath came shallow, my pulse thudding in my ears. The sound of another engine rose in the distance, and I realized then she was right. The first bus wasn't ours, but something was coming, and this time it was slowing down. When the police finally called me in, I thought it was to give me answers. By then, Dana had been gone for 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of me checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for a message that never came. 3 days of replaying that night at the bus stop in my head until I couldn't tell if I was remembering it right or just making things up. Her family had already been interviewed. Her co-workers, too. I wasn't just a co-worker. I was the last one who saw her. That's what the officer said when I walked into the station. You were the last person. Like it was a weight he was putting on me. Like I was already guilty of something I didn't even understand. They led me to a small, windowless room that smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. The walls were bare except for a buzzing fluorescent light overhead. A table, 2 chairs, nothing else. I sat there alone for a few minutes before the detective came in. Middle-aged, tired eyes, suit that didn't fit quite right. He set a folder on the table and studied me like I was a puzzle he didn't want to solve. "You were waiting with her at the bus stop?" he asked. "Yes," I said. My voice came out softer than I meant it to. "We left work together. We were waiting." And then I trailed off. I couldn't bring myself to say the rest. The empty bus. The frozen time. The lights cycling over and over. He nodded like he already knew I wasn't going to give him anything useful. Then he opened the folder and pulled out a disc. "We pulled security footage," he said. "The transit authority keeps cameras on most of the buses. Thought you should see it?" He slid a laptop across the table. The screen flickered, grainy black and white footage filling the frame. I leaned closer. my pulse hammering in my throat. There was the bus. I recognized it instantly, the same route Dana always took. The timestamp on the corner matched the night she vanished. The video showed the inside of the bus. Empty seats, the driver barely visible in the mirror. The doors opened and rain blurred the lens for a second, and then Dana stepped on. I felt my chest tighten. There she was. Hood pulled up, bag clutched to her side, shaking droplets of water from her sleeves. She moved down the aisle and sat halfway back near the window. She looked normal, like nothing was wrong, I whispered. That's her. The detective nodded but didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the screen. The bus pulled away. A few minutes passed. The camera stayed fixed, showing Dana staring out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. The driver's shoulders shifted now and then. No one else boarded. And then, the bus stopped again. The doors opened. Rained. But Dana didn't move. The bus waited. Then the doors shut and it pulled away. The detective clicked the trackpad, fast-forwarding. Stops came and went. Doors opening, doors closing. Passengers boarding, some exiting. But Dana never moved. She just sat there by the window, staring out. And then somewhere between one stop and the next, she was gone. No one saw her get up. No one walked past the camera. One frame, she was there. The next, her seat was empty. I recoiled, my breath catching in my chest. Wait, go back, he rewound. Played it again. She sat there, rain dripping down the glass, her reflection ghostly beside her. Then nothing. Like she'd been erased, I felt sick. My stomach twisted, bile burning at the back of my throat. That's not possible, I whispered. She never got off. She couldn't have just... But she had. The detective paused the video, her empty seat frozen on the screen. He finally looked at me. You said you were with her at the stop. You said the bus passed by without stopping. I nodded, trembling. Yes, I saw it. I waved at it. It didn't stop. He tapped the screen with his pen. She got on? I shook my head. No, she didn't. I was right there. I swear she didn't. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. The footage was right there, undeniable, but it wasn't right. It wasn't the truth I'd lived. People don't just disappear off cameras, I said. The detective's face didn't change. He just closed the laptop and slid it back into the folder. People disappear all the time, he said quietly. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he explain it, to ask him how a human being could just blink out of existence like a bad edit in a film. But the words stuck in my throat, because part of me already knew. The bus that passed us wasn't empty. It wasn't a mistake. It was something else. Something I couldn't name. Dana hadn't just vanished. She'd been taken. When they let me out, the sky was gray and heavy, threatening more rain. I stood on the steps of the station, shivering even though the air was still. The city looked the same as always, cars moving, people talking, storefronts buzzing with neon, but it didn't feel the same. Every bus that passed made my stomach knot. Every open door looked like a trap. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the image burned into my brain. Dana's reflection in the window, the curve of her shoulders, the way she never moved. And then the empty seat. I kept thinking about the time on my phone that night. 12:14 a.m. Frozen. No matter how many times I checked. What if the footage wasn't showing me what happened? What if it was showing me what was supposed to happen? Like the bus had claimed her, and the camera had recorded it that way all along. I don't know how long I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. But at some point, I heard the sound of brakes outside my window. A hiss. A low rumble, a bus stopping. I forced myself to get up, step to the blinds, and peek through. The street was empty. No headlights. No bus. Just the sound, still echoing in my ears. And for the first time, I realized the detective was wrong. People don't disappear all the time. But Dana did. And I think the bus is still waiting for me. I told myself I'd never take the bus again. For years, I kept that promise. I walked, I carpooled, I paid for rides I couldn't afford. Anything to avoid standing on that curb in the rain, waiting for something that might never arrive. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest memories. What once felt like a raw wound slowly turned into a scar I learned to live with. People stopped asking about Dana after a while. Her name stopped coming up at work, then at family gatherings, and eventually even in my own thoughts. At least, that's what I told myself. But the truth is, she was always there. In every bus I passed on the street, in every hiss of brakes at an intersection, in every flicker of neon on wet pavement. Always there, like a whisper in the back of my mind. And then, one night, years later, I broke my promise. It wasn't intentional. My car had been totaled in an accident the week before, and I couldn't keep paying for rides. The weather was terrible, rain falling in sheets, streets flooding ankle deep, and I was exhausted. So when I saw the glowing sign of the bus stop, I thought, just this once. It was almost midnight. The shelter was cracked, the bench slick with water, and the city felt emptier than usual. I pulled my hood up and checked my phone. 11:58. The next bus was listed as Route 19. That was Dana's route. My stomach dropped when I saw it, but I told myself it didn't matter. Bus numbers change. Drivers retire. It had been years. Nothing would happen. When the headlights finally cut through the rain, I froze. The bus glided up to the curb, its brakes exhaling in that long, familiar hiss. The doors creaked open, and for a second I just stood there, heart pounding, convinced that if I stepped on, I'd never step off again. But then the driver leaned forward into the light, and my blood ran cold. It was him. The same driver from the footage. I recognized the curve of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, the faint slump in his shoulders. He looked exactly the same. Not older, not different. The same as the night Dana disappeared. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't say a word, didn't motion for me to hurry, didn't even look surprised to see me. He just waited. The rain was soaking through my shoes, and something in me, the part that wanted answers, more than it wanted safety, moved my legs forward. I stepped on. The doors closed behind me with a sound like a final decision. The inside of the bus smelled faintly of damp, vinyl, and something metallic. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I walked down the aisle. A handful of people sat scattered through the seats, but none of them looked up. Not one pair of eyes met mine. I sat near the back in the same row Dana had chosen. My heart thudded in my chest, every beat too heavy, too sharp. The bus pulled away. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows. Street after street passed by, empty and lifeless. The hum of the engine was steady, hypnotic, and the longer I sat there, the more I felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't escape. I glanced at my phone. 12:14, the same time as before. It didn't change. I stared at the glowing numbers until my vision blurred, my breath coming faster. No matter how many times I refreshed it, the time stayed frozen. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror once, catching mine. Just once, and I swear in that second I felt recognition, like he knew exactly who I was. The bus kept moving. Stops came and went. The doors opened, rain hissing louder, but no one got on. No one got off. I tried to look at the other passengers, but they were wrong somehow. Their faces blurred, indistinct, like my brain couldn't process them. Some looked asleep, some stared out the windows, but the longer I tried to focus on them, the more unreal they seemed. And then, without realizing it, I found myself looking at the seat beside me. It was empty, but in the reflection of the glass, someone was there. Dana. Her hood was up. Her face pale and blurred by the streaks of water on the window, but it was her, sitting beside me watching the city pass. I turned my head so fast my neck popped, but the seat was empty. I swallowed hard, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. "Dana," I whispered. My voice cracked in the silence, and for a moment I thought she might answer, but the bus just kept moving. I don't know how long I rode like that. Minutes, hours, it didn't matter. The streets outside weren't familiar anymore. The buildings were taller, darker, wrong. The streetlights were further apart, leaving long stretches of blackness that seemed to swallow the bus whole before spitting it back out. Finally, the bus slowed. The brakes hissed, and the doors opened to a place I didn't recognize. It wasn't a stop. There was no shelter, no sign, no sidewalk. Just a stretch of cracked asphalt disappearing into the dark woods. The driver turned his head for the first time. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. And then, softly, he said, "This is your stop." My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I shook my head, my voice barely more than a whisper. "No, not me." His expression didn't change. "This is your stop," he repeated. The passengers didn't move. They didn't look up. It was like they hadn't heard him at all. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to stand. My body moved toward the door, even though every nerve in me screamed not to. When my feet hit the wet asphalt, I felt the air change. The rain had stopped. The woods were silent. Too silent. I turned back, desperate to see the bus again, desperate to see the driver, the passengers, anything that would ground me in reality. But the bus was gone. No taillights. No engine. No hiss of brakes. Just me, standing on an empty stretch of road with the trees closing in on either side. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen lit up, and for the first time, the time had changed, 17 a.m., and at the top of the screen was a single notification, a text from Dana. It said, "Don't miss the next one. I've stayed in more motels than I can count. That comes with the job. I've been a salesman for almost 15 years now, the kind that drives from town to town with a suitcase of samples and a tired smile, always telling strangers what they need to buy. Most of the places blur together after a while. Beige walls, cigarette-stained curtains, the steady hum of a broken air conditioner that never quite cools the room. I learned early on not to expect much, but there are some places that stick with you, not because they're better, but because they're worse. This story is about one of those places. It was summer, late July, and the highways shimmered with heat. I had been driving for hours, the sun lowering behind me, and by the time I pulled off at exit 63, I was half dizzy from exhaustion. The motel was the only one for miles. A squat, L-shaped building tucked behind a gas station, its sign buzzing faintly in the dusk. Most of the letters were out. It just read Motel. I almost laughed when I saw it. The kind of place you'd pass without a second glance if you weren't desperate. But I was desperate. I parked, grabbed my bag, and stepped into the small front office. The air smelled like dust and faint mildew, and the overhead light flickered with a slow, uneven pulse. Behind the counter was a man who looked like he hadn't moved in years. His skin was the color of parchment, and his eyes were sunk deep into his skull. He didn't greet me, just slid the guest book forward and tapped a pen beside it. "Just one night," I muttered, signing my name. He slid me a key. An actual key, not a card, on a heavy brass ring with the number 12 stamped into it. When I asked about the Wi-Fi, he just gave me a look like I'd said something ridiculous. I walked across the cracked asphalt lot toward my room. The air was still and heavy, carrying that strange smell you only notice in small, dying towns, something between gasoline and wet soil. Room 12 was at the far end of the building, tucked into a shadow. The door was dented, the paint peeling, but the key turned with a stubborn click. The room was exactly what I expected. 2 beds with threadbare covers, a wooden nightstand with a lamp that leaned to one side, and a television that looked like it hadn't worked since the 90s. The carpet was stained with dark blotches I didn't want to think about. I dropped my bag on the nearest bed and sat down, feeling the springs groan under my weight. It was just one night, I told myself. I'd sleep, wake early, and drive on. By the time the sun was up, this place would just be another pinprick in my memory. But it didn't go that way. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Most motels are loud. You hear TVs through the walls, footsteps on the balcony, cars pulling in and out. But here there was nothing. Not even the hum of traffic from the highway. It was as if the world outside the room had gone still. I turned on the TV. Static filled the screen. I tried changing the channels, but nothing came through. Just that endless hiss. The air conditioner rattled when I switched it on, blowing a faint smell of mold. It didn't cool the room, it just made the silence louder. I stretched out on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The light above me buzzed faintly, flickering every so often. I felt restless, uneasy, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the motel clerk's eyes, or the way the air seemed thicker here, heavier. Or maybe it was just the loneliness that creeps in when you're far from home and surrounded by strangers. I tried to close my eyes, but my thoughts wouldn't quiet. At some point I heard footsteps. They were faint, almost delicate, moving along the balcony outside. I froze, holding my breath, listening. The steps stopped right outside my door. I waited for a knock. None came. After a minute, they moved again, slow and dragging until they faded into nothing. I told myself it was just another guest. Someone heading to their room. Nothing unusual, but when I finally built up the courage to peek through the curtain, the parking lot was empty. Every space, even mine. My car was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the vacant asphalt, heart thundering in my chest. I knew I had parked right outside. I remembered the way the headlights cut across the office sign, the sound of my keys jingling in my hand. But the car wasn't there. The lot was bare, slick with shadows, the buzzing sign casting faint light over nothing. I backed away from the window, trying to breathe. Maybe I parked in a different row, I thought. Maybe I'm just tired, remembering wrong, but I knew I wasn't. When I finally sat back down on the bed, something felt different. The air in the room had shifted, pressing in closer. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was watching me. I checked my phone. No service. The time read 12:03. I tried calling myself down. Just sleep, I told myself. In the morning, this will make sense. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something. A shuffle near the door. A low creak from the bathroom. Once even a whisper, so soft I couldn't make out the words. At some point, I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. And then I dreamed. I dreamed I was walking the motel's balcony. The rooms stretched further than they should have, the building looping back on itself. Endless doors with the same brass number. 12. Each door I passed, I heard a sound inside. A cough, a sob, a sharp intake of breath. But when I tried to open them, the keys slipped from my hands, clattering into the dark. Finally, I reached my own door. I opened it, and inside wasn't my room, it was the office. The clerk was there, sitting behind the counter, his eyes locked on me. "You shouldn't have checked in," he said. His voice was dry, papery, as if it hadn't been used in years. When I woke, the lamp was off. I hadn't turned it off. The room was dark, shadows crowding in, and for a moment, I couldn't move. My limbs felt heavy, pinned, like the weight of the dream had followed me back. Slowly, my eyes adjusted, and that's when I saw it. The door was open, not wide, just a crack, barely enough to notice. But I knew I had locked it. I remembered the click of the bolt. Something was in the room. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at that sliver of open space, waiting for something, anything, to show itself. Minutes passed. Finally, with shaking hands, I reached over and flicked on the lamp. The room was empty, but on the nightstand, next to the buzzing light, lay the motel key. Not the one I'd been given. This one was rusted, the number scratched and faded, but I could still read it. Room 12. I didn't sleep much that first night in the motel. The mattress dipped so low in the middle it felt like I was lying in a shallow grave, and the air conditioner rattled loud enough to drown out my thoughts. Still, exhaustion eventually dragged me under. I woke up sometime after midnight to a sound I couldn't place. At first, I thought it was the old AC unit, but when I held my breath, I realized it was coming from the wall behind my bed. A soft scratching. It wasn't fast or frantic, just slow, steady, like nails dragging across plaster. The kind of sound you'd hear if someone was trying to make a mark they didn't want erased. I sat there in the dark, listening. The wall behind my bed was shared with room 6. I remembered seeing the guy who checked in there earlier that evening. a middle-aged man in a brown jacket hauling a beat-up duffel bag. He had nodded at me once, but he didn't smile. He didn't look like the kind of person who smiled much. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe rats in the walls or pipes creaking. Old motels had their quirks, and this one had plenty. I turned over, pulled the covers tighter, and eventually slipped back into a shallow, restless sleep. In the morning, I noticed something strange. Room 6 was quiet. When I stepped outside to grab a coffee from the vending machine, I glanced at the row of doors. The man's duffel bag was gone from the walkway where he'd left it. His curtains were drawn shut, but I didn't hear the TV or the muffled coughs I'd picked up the night before. Just silence. I thought maybe he'd left early. Business travelers did that all the time. Check in late, leave before sunrise. Nothing unusual. But when I passed the front desk on my way to my car, I noticed the old clerk flipping through the registry. He looked up and gave me this tired glance. "Everything okay in your room?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah, fine. Why?" He shrugged. "Guy in room 6 was supposed to check out this morning. Never came by. Not like him either. Always paid early. Always." That word stuck with me. It meant the man had stayed here before. I didn't say anything. Just walked past him and got in my car, telling myself none of it mattered, but the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about that scratching sound. That night, the motel felt emptier. I didn't see anyone else checking in. The parking lot only had a couple of cars, one of which was mine. I lay in bed, staring at the stained ceiling, when it started again. The scratching. It was softer this time, but steady. Like someone was tracing letters or shapes over and over. I pressed my ear against the wall. My skin prickled. I couldn't make out words, but it felt deliberate, human. I knocked once, just to see. The scratching stopped. I froze, my knuckles still pressed against the drywall. For a long time there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, I heard movement on the other side. Not footsteps. More like a body shifting in bed. A long sigh. I pulled back and climbed under the covers, my heart pounding. I told myself I was imagining things. That room 6 wasn't even occupied anymore. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone on that wall. The next morning, I saw the maid pushing her cart past my door. She stopped at room 6 and knocked, waiting. No answer. She used her key and went inside. I lingered just long enough to hear her footsteps cross the room. Then silence. A minute later, she came out, her face pale. She shut the door quickly and wheeled her cart away without even looking at me. That was the first time I felt something was wrong. Not just strange, wrong. I went to the front desk and asked about the man in room 6. The clerk barely looked up. Checked out, but I didn't believe him. I'd seen the maid's face. I'd heard the scratching. That night I stayed up later, waiting. I left the lamp on, telling myself it was to read, though the book sat unopened in my lap. I just didn't want to be in the dark. Around 1 a.m., it started again, scratch, scratch, scratch. I sat perfectly still, every muscle in my body tight. The sound was clearer now, like nails carving into wood. I whispered, "Hello?" The scratching stopped. For a long time, there was nothing. Then faintly, I heard it. Something pressing against the other side of the wall. Not scratching this time. Just a single heavy thump. Like a hand, I jerked back, my breath catching in my throat. That was enough. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the sound was gone. The wall was silent. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But when I went to brush my teeth, I noticed something near the sink. The wallpaper on the far wall was peeling slightly at the corner. At first, I thought it was just from dampness, but when I pulled it back, I froze. Beneath the cheap floral print was a patch of drywall covered in scratches. Long, jagged lines gouged deep into the plaster, like someone had been trying to claw their way out. I let the paper fall back into place and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked pale, drained, like I'd aged 10 years overnight. I didn't tell the clerk. I didn't say a word to anyone. But that night, when I lay in bed again, I couldn't stop staring at that wall. I knew, without a doubt, that room 6 wasn't empty. Whatever had happened to that man in the brown jacket, he hadn't just left. And whatever was still in that room, it was still trying to get out. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in that motel. The scratches in the wall. The silence from room 6. The maid's pale face when she came out of there. It all weighed on me like a stone pressing against my chest. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know more. I went to the front desk around noon. The lobby was dim with a faint smell of stale coffee and something else. Mildew, maybe. Behind the counter, the manager sat hunched over a newspaper. He wasn't the same clerk I'd seen before. This man was older, heavier, with thinning white hair and a lazy eye that didn't quite focus on me when he looked up. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, can I ask you something about room 6? His gaze lingered on me for a moment too long. Then he folded the paper and set it aside. "What about it? I heard some strange noises the past couple of nights, and I saw the guy who checked in there. Middle-aged, brown jacket. But then he was just gone. Did he leave already?" The manager's expression barely shifted. He leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers over his stomach, and said, "Nobody's been in room 6 for weeks." I stared at him. "That's not true. I saw him with my own eyes. Checked in the same night I did." The manager shook his head. "You must be mistaken. That room hasn't been rented out. Plumbing issues. Been keeping it closed off." His tone was final, but I felt my skin crawl. He was lying. I knew he was. I tried again. "Listen, I heard he cut me off. You hear all kinds of things in old motels, pipes, vermin, wind in the ducts. Play tricks on you when you're tired." I stood there for a moment, unsure if I should push further. Finally, I nodded and walked out, but every step felt heavy, like I was moving through water. That night, the scratching came back, louder, longer, and this time, I didn't try to ignore it. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to hear. The sound wasn't just scratching anymore. It was almost rhythmic, like someone was trying to send a message. Scratch, pause. Scratch, pause, I whispered again. "Hello?" No answer. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. The next morning, I returned to the desk. The same manager was there, his newspaper spread wide. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I know someone was in room 6. I heard them. I know it." This time, the manager lowered the paper slowly, his lazy eye drifting slightly off-center as he studied me. "Room 6? He muttered. "Oh, you must mean the young couple." My stomach tightened. "Couple? No, I saw a man. Alone." The manager frowned as though confused. No, young couple. Checked in last month. Haven't seen him since. Paid cash. Nice enough. But they didn't leave the room much." I blinked. His story had changed completely. Yesterday, he told me nobody had been in that room for weeks. Now it was a couple. "You're not making sense," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Rooms remember people differently." That was all he said before raising the paper again, effectively shutting me out. "Rooms remember people differently." The phrase echoed in my head the rest of the day. That night, I couldn't stay still. I paced my room, glancing at the wall every few minutes. By midnight, the scratching started again. But this time, it was accompanied by something else. A voice. It was faint, muffled by drywall, but I swear I heard a man whispering. I pressed my ear close, straining, trying to make out words. It was impossible to understand, but the tone was desperate, pleading. Then, a knock. 3 slow knocks against the other side of the wall. I jumped back, my pulse hammering in my throat. Whoever or whatever was in room 6 knew I was listening. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I went straight to the desk. The manager was there again, sipping coffee from a cracked mug. "I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Who stayed in room 6? I demanded. He looked up at me, unimpressed. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," I snapped. "First you said no one. Then you said a couple. Which one is it?" The manager stared at me for a long time. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You really want to know?" I nodded. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "There was a man. Stayed in there off and on. Salesman, I think. Came through every few months. Always took room 6. Always by himself." My skin crawled. That matched what I had seen. The man with the duffel bag, the brown jacket. "What happened to him?" I asked. The manager shrugged. "He left. Same as anyone else. I felt anger rise up in me. No, he didn't leave. He's still in there. I heard him. The manager's gaze didn't waver. Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't. Some people check in and never check out. You'd be surprised how often it happens. The way he said it. Casual, almost amused. Like it was a joke, only he understood. I left the lobby shaking. His words had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. That night, the scratching was worse than ever. It started earlier, just after sunset, and went on for hours. I tried to block it out, but the harder I tried, the louder it seemed. At one point, I swore I heard my own name whispered through the wall. By dawn, I felt like I was losing my mind. I went back to the desk one last time. The manager was waiting like he'd been expecting me. "You look tired," he said. "Tell me who's in room 6, I whispered. He tilted his head, his lazy eye drifting off again. "Which version do you want? The man? The couple? Or maybe the family?" My throat went dry. "The family?" He nodded slowly. "Husband, wife, little girl? They stayed a few years back. Checked into room 6, never came out. Police came sniffing around, but they didn't find anything. Place like this, it eats people. They vanish, and the room keeps the noise." "The noise," I repeated, my voice hollow. He leaned closer. I could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. "You hear it, don't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The look on my face must have told him everything. He sat back, satisfied. "Then you already know. Room 6 isn't empty. It's never empty." I stumbled back to my room in a haze, my mind unraveling. His words gnawed at me, twisting with the sounds I'd heard in the walls. Different stories, different people. None of it lined up. But one thing was clear. Whatever had happened in room 6, it wasn't over, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay before it pulled me in, too. I woke up the next morning with the sound of scratching still lodged in my head, as if it had followed me into my dreams. My mouth was dry, my body heavy, but there was no rest in me. It was that kind of half-sleep where you wake up more tired than before. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ugly patterned carpet, when I noticed something strange. There was a duffel bag sitting near the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was mine. The same faded green canvas, the same worn leather strap. But when I went to check, I froze. It wasn't my bag. The zipper was half open, and inside, I could see a neatly folded brown jacket. The exact same jacket I'd seen on the man who had checked into room 6. I staggered back. My first thought was that someone had broken in during the night, left it there as some kind of sick joke. But the door was locked. The latch was still in place. The window shut. My second thought was worse, that I had somehow mistaken my own belongings for his. But when I opened the duffel, I saw items I didn't recognize. A set of shaving supplies, an old paperback novel with bent corners, and a wallet. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked up the wallet with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was an ID, a driver's license for a man named Evan Marks. That was the man from room 6. I knew it. I dropped the wallet like it had burned me. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, lying face down, the man's photo hidden again. That's when I noticed something else. The toothbrush in the bathroom wasn't mine. It was blue, worn down at the bristles. I used a black one. My black one was still there, but now there were two toothbrushes. 2 sets of toiletries. I stumbled back into the room, heart pounding, eyes scanning everything. And the more I looked, the more I saw. A pair of shoes by the door, brown, scuffed, not mine. A travel mug on the nightstand that hadn't been there before. A wrinkled shirt draped over the chair. One size too big for me. It was like our lives, mine and his, were bleeding together. I couldn't tell where my things ended and his began. For a long time, I just stood there, frozen. My brain trying to stitch together some explanation, any explanation. But every thought unraveled as fast as it came. Finally, I grabbed the duffel and stormed down to the lobby. The manager was behind the desk again, as if he'd never left. He looked up slowly, that lazy eye drifting, and gave me a thin smile. "Morning," he said. I slammed the duffel on the counter. "This isn't mine." It was in my room. He tilted his head as though curious but not surprised. He opened the bag casually, glanced inside, and then closed it again. "Looks like it belongs to a guest," he said simply. "No kidding," I snapped. "Evan Marks, room 6, where is he?" The manager's smile faded just slightly. He shook his head. "Room 6 has been vacant for months. Stop lying to me," I shouted. My voice cracked. "I saw him." He checked in. "I heard him through the wall. And now his things are in my room." The manager just leaned back, folding his arms. "People leave things behind. It happens all the time. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you don't remember what's yours anymore." His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, because for a second I wondered if he was right. I thought about the toothbrushes, the shoes, the shirt. Had they really not been mine? Had I just forgotten? No, I knew my things. I wasn't crazy. I pushed the duffel bag toward him. "Take it, it's not mine." He didn't move. "Your room's paid through the end of the week," he said, almost kindly. "Why don't you get some rest?" "Things make more sense when you're rested." I stormed back upstairs, but the doubt followed me like a shadow. Back in the room, I picked through everything carefully, each item one by one. Some I recognized without question. My shirts, my laptop, my charger. But then there were others. Things I couldn't place. Socks that weren't my size. A notepad with handwriting that wasn't mine. And the worst part? Some of the things looked like they had been with me for a long time. Worn in, used, like they belonged to me all along. I felt dizzy. My mind raced, clawing for a line between reality and whatever this was. By evening, I couldn't stand being in the room anymore. I went for a walk, pacing the cracked sidewalk in front of the motel, watching the neon vacancy sign flicker in and out. Each time it blinked off, the parking lot plunged into darkness, only to be washed in sickly red again when it flicked on. Vacancy, vacancy, vacancy. The word looped in my head until it didn't sound like a word anymore. When I finally went back to my room, I found something waiting for me on the bed. A photograph. It was old, edges frayed, colors faded. In it, a man stood in front of the motel, smiling stiffly at the camera. He wore the same brown jacket, Evan Marks. But what made my stomach twist was what I saw in the background. Through the window of room 6, another figure was standing, blurred by the glass but watching, always watching. I dropped the photo and backed away. My hands shook, my whole body trembling. Someone was toying with me, or worse, someone wanted me to take his place. That night, the scratching started again, louder than ever. I pressed a pillow over my ears, but it was no use. The wall pulsed with sound as if it were alive. When I finally gathered the courage to whisper back, I said, "What do you want?" The answer came in 3 slow knocks. Not from room 6 this time, from inside my closet. When I was a child, Sundays always began the same way. My parents dressed me in stiff clothes that smelled faintly of mothballs. We piled into the car and we drove to the small white church on the edge of town. I never paid much attention to the sermons. I was too busy staring out the windows, watching the trees sway in the summer heat, or trying not to fall asleep as the pastor's voice droned on. What I do remember are the picnics. After service, families would gather in the field behind the church. It was just a wide stretch of land, tall grass rippling like waves in the breeze, bordered by woods that seemed to go on forever. The older folks brought blankets and baskets. The women set out fried chicken and potato salad, and the children ran wild, chasing each other in circles until they collapsed from heat and laughter. That field holds some of my happiest memories. And my darkest, I was about 8 the day it happened. My cousin Daniel was a year younger than me, full of energy, always a little reckless. He had one of those laughs that made you want to follow him, no matter where he went. My parents warned me often that Daniel was a bad influence, that he didn't listen, that he was always testing limits. Maybe that was true, but I adored him. That afternoon, the sun was high and the grass was so tall it brushed our shoulders. The grown-ups were too busy talking, eating, gossiping to notice where we wandered. I remember Daniel daring me to run into the grass with him. He said there was something out there, something he wanted to find. "What is it?" I asked, already nervous. "You'll see," he grinned, and before I could protest, he bolted into the field. I hesitated at the edge, the stalks of grass swaying in the breeze like they were alive. I could hear him laughing, his voice moving deeper, muffled by the green walls around him. I wanted to follow, but fear held me back. I don't know why. Something about that field had always unsettled me, even before that day. Maybe it was the way the grass seemed endless, or how it hid everything beneath it. I shouted for him to come back, but his laughter only grew fainter. Then there was silence. At first, I thought he was trying to scare me. That was the kind of thing Daniel would do, hide and jump out at the last second. So I waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. I called his name until my throat hurt, but the only sound was the steady hum of insects. Finally, I ran back to the picnic, crying, tugging on my mother's sleeve. I told her Daniel was lost. The adults brushed me off at first, assuming he'd show up any second, covered in grass stains and grinning. But when minutes stretched into an hour, panic began to spread. The men formed a line and combed through the field. Mothers clutched their other children close. Someone ran to town for help. I watched from the church steps as the line of searchers pushed into the grass, their voices echoing, calling Daniel's name. But no answer came. I don't remember much about the rest of that day. Only fragments. The sight of my aunt collapsing to her knees, screaming his name. The look on my father's face, pale and grim as he emerged from the grass, shaking his head. The way the police cars sat uselessly in the gravel lot, lights spinning but no answers given. They never found Daniel. Not a trace. No torn fabric, no shoe, no broken path through the grass. It was as if the field swallowed him whole. The official story was that he wandered too far, got lost, maybe crossed into the woods. But I knew that wasn't true, because the grass wasn't that deep, and the woods weren't that far. Someone or something had taken him. For years I avoided that field. Even as a teenager, I wouldn't step near it. We still went to the church sometimes, though the picnic stopped after Daniel vanished. Families whispered about curses, about bad omens. Eventually, people stopped talking about it altogether, as if silence could bury the truth. But for me, the memory never faded. I still see the moment in my dreams sometimes. Daniel's small frame disappearing into the tall grass, his laugh echoing, then cut short like a switch had been flipped. I think what haunts me most is that I didn't follow him. I was right there. If I had run after him, maybe things would be different. Maybe we both would have been lost. Or maybe it would have been me instead of him. All I know is that the field never gave him back. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can picture it clearly. The way the sun lit up the blades of grass until they glowed gold. The smell of earth and wildflowers. The sound of cicadas buzzing in the heat. And that strange, hollow silence after his laughter stopped. It was the kind of silence that doesn't belong in the world of the living. The adults tried to shield me from the truth. But children know. I knew even then that Daniel hadn't just disappeared. He had been taken. And somewhere, in the depths of that endless grass, something was still waiting, something that watches, something that remembers. I was only 8 when my cousin vanished. But the memory of that day split my life in two. The time before the field and the time after, and no matter how many years pass, I can still hear him laughing, somewhere just beyond reach. I don't think I ever forgot the sound of that first siren. It wasn't like in the movies, no rushing chaos, no organized lines of officers marching in. It was just one old county cruiser pulling up, gravel crunching under its tires, red and blue lights flashing against the white paint of the church. People had already begun whispering about Daniel being gone for too long, but when the police showed up, everything turned heavier. It wasn't just a child playing anymore. It was something else. I stayed close to my mother, holding her hand so tight my knuckles hurt. I watched the officers step out, 2 men in tan uniforms, slow and cautious, like they already knew this wasn't going to end the way people hoped. One of them radioed in. The other walked straight into the field with his hat pulled low, peering into the grass like it might lunge at him. But what I remember most came about an hour later, when the dogs arrived. They pulled up in another truck, cages rattling in the back. I'd never seen bloodhounds in person before. They looked tired, droopy-eyed, their skin sagging as though it were melting off their bones. But when they barked, The sound was deep, guttural, like something old and certain. The handlers wasted no time. They pulled out a small sneaker, Daniel's sneaker, and held it to the dogs' noses. I remember my aunt screaming when she realized they had found it in the field. The dogs sniffed, then strained against their leashes, pulling forward, eager. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. These animals were trained to find people. They'd find Daniel. He'd come walking back, embarrassed, maybe scolded, but safe. Only that's not what happened. I watched them lead the dogs into the grass, the blades bending and parting in slow, whispering waves. I could see the tips of the handlers' hats moving deeper, their uniforms vanishing until they were just outlines against the sea of green. The dogs barked once, twice, then fell silent. Minutes passed. Then they came back. The handlers looked pale, uneasy. The dogs didn't look like the same creatures that had been so eager to search moments ago. Their ears were flat, their tails tucked, their bodies pulling backward against the leash instead of forward. One of them whimpered, a high-pitched sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. They tried again. Another scent cloth, more encouragement. The dogs circled at the edge of the field, noses low, pacing in tight loops, but none of them would go deeper. They would get maybe 10, 15 feet in, then stop. Their bodies stiff, their paws frozen in the grass as if some invisible line had been drawn. One officer muttered that maybe there were coyotes in there, or a snake den, something that spooked the animals. But I knew better. I could feel it too, that invisible wall. It wasn't the kind of fear that made sense. It was the kind that pressed against your chest, heavy and suffocating, until even breathing felt wrong. I heard one of the handlers whisper, "They don't like it. It's like something's already in there." That's when the adults started panicking in earnest. People shouted over each other, half praying, half accusing. My aunt kept demanding answers, grabbing at the officers, shaking her fists like anger could pull her boy back from the grass. My mother pulled me away, tried to cover my ears, but I still heard everything, and I saw it too. When the dogs refused again, their handlers tried dragging them forward, tugging hard on the leashes. The animals dug their claws into the dirt, whining, twisting their bodies sideways to resist. One of them let out a sound I'll never forget. Not a bark, not a whimper. It was a scream. Raw, panicked, human in its desperation. Then all at once they broke. All three dogs turned, pulling so violently that the men holding them nearly lost their grip. They bolted for the police truck, dragging their handlers with them, scrambling up into the cages without even being told. I'd never seen animals act that way before. These were search dogs, trained, disciplined, and yet they wanted nothing to do with that field. Nothing at all. The adults tried to explain it away. Maybe the dogs smelled a predator. Maybe the heat was getting to them. But I watched the handlers' faces as they closed the cage doors. Their expressions told a different story. They looked shaken. They wouldn't meet each other's eyes. Something in that grass wasn't right, and the dogs knew it. The search dragged on into the evening. Men went into the field with flashlights, calling, pushing deeper, combing through every inch. But the line always curved back. No one seemed willing to go too far. They'd press in maybe halfway, then drift sideways until they were back at the edge again. From the church steps, it almost looked like they were circling, like the grass itself kept nudging them away. And the whole time, the dogs stayed in their cages, silent. Not a bark, not a whine, just silent, watching. As night fell, the mood turned heavier. Lanterns glowed on the church lawn, casting long shadows across the field. My aunt had gone hoarse from screaming. My father stood stiff and quiet, one hand on my shoulder, though I could feel him trembling. When the sheriff finally told everyone they'd resume the search in the morning, I thought my aunt might claw his face. She begged them to keep looking. She said Daniel was afraid of the dark, that he hated being alone. She said he needed his mother. But the sheriff just shook his head. He said the field was too dangerous at night. Dangerous? That word stayed with me. What could be dangerous about tall grass? That night I couldn't sleep. We stayed at the church with other families, cots set up in the fellowship hall. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the adults whisper in the corner. I heard one man say the dogs acted like they were circling something, not following a trail, circling. like there was something at the center of the field they refused to approach. Another said he felt watched the whole time he was in there, like eyes moved with him through the grass. Someone else muttered that the ground was wrong, softer in some places, like it wasn't holding weight the way it should, and then the voices fell quiet. Because no one wanted to say what we were all thinking. Maybe Daniel hadn't just wandered off. Maybe he was still there, not alive, not dead, just there. By morning, the dogs were gone. Taken back to town, I guess. They never returned. I asked about it once, years later, when I was old enough to piece the memory together. I asked my father why they didn't bring the dogs back. He just stared at me for a long time, his jaw tight, his eyes glassy. Finally, he said, because they already told us what we needed to know. He never explained what he meant. He didn't have to. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see those dogs at the edge of the field, circling tighter and tighter, their bodies stiff, their ears pressed flat. They weren't confused. They weren't distracted. They were afraid. They knew something was in that grass, something they couldn't fight. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me awake after all these years, is the thought that maybe Daniel saw it too. Maybe he was running toward it when he laughed that last time, or maybe it was waiting for him. It took me years to go back. I told myself I'd never set foot in that field again. After Daniel disappeared, after the police left with their flashlights and excuses, after the dogs refused to cross that invisible line, I promised myself I'd stay far away. But promises made in fear don't always hold up against time. Life moved forward. My family stopped attending that little church, though no one ever said why. My aunt and uncle moved away completely, as if putting distance between themselves and the field might erase what happened. People in town stopped talking about it, or at least they stopped talking about it around me, but I never forgot. I carried the memory like a stone in my pocket, heavy, cold, always there, even when I tried to ignore it. And as I got older, that stone turned into something else, a question. What really happened to Daniel? I was 23 the first time I drove back. I told myself I was just passing through, just curious, just wanted to see the church again, but that was a lie. I went because the memory wouldn't leave me alone, because I needed to know if the field was really as strange as I remembered, or if I had just been a scared kid caught in the middle of tragedy. The church looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had peeled. The bell tower leaned slightly, and the windows were filmed over with dust. No one had used it in years. The gravel lot was cracked, weeds pushing through the stones. But the field was the same. Tall grass swaying in the wind, stretching wide and endless. Green bleeding into gold as the sun dipped lower. From the edge, it looked calm, harmless even, almost beautiful. But the longer I stared, the heavier my chest felt. The same weight I'd felt as a child. Like something invisible was pressing down on me, urging me to stay out. I stood there for a long time, my car idling behind me, keys still in the ignition. I told myself I'd just look for a minute, then leave. But then I saw it. A path. At first I thought it was just the wind flattening the grass in a strange pattern. But when I walked closer, I realized it was too straight, too narrow, too deliberate. A line cut through the grass, barely wide enough for a person to walk single file, and it led straight into the field. My stomach knotted. I hadn't expected this. I'd expected the grass to look wild, untouched, but this path was fresh. The grass on either side stood tall, while the center was pressed down flat, as though something or someone had walked it recently. I don't know why I followed it. Curiosity, maybe, or something deeper. Some pull I couldn't resist. I stepped into the grass. Immediately, the world shifted. The church disappeared behind me. The sound of the wind dimmed, replaced by a muffled hush, like the air itself had thickened. The stalks of grass closed in on either side, taller than me now, their tips brushing together above my head. I kept walking. The path was so narrow I had to place one foot directly in front of the other. My shoulders brushed against the stalks. They were rough, cutting tiny scratches into my skin. The smell was sharp, earthy, almost sweet. I thought about the dogs then, how they had circled, refused to enter. I wondered if I was making the same mistake they had avoided, but I didn't stop. The path kept going, straight and unbroken. After a while, I lost track of time. It felt like I had been walking for hours, though I knew it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Still, I never reached the other side. I glanced back once, hoping to see the church, the road, anything. But all I saw was grass. The path behind me was gone. My chest tightened. My breath quickened. For a moment, I thought about running. But where would I go? The only direction left was forward, so I walked. At last, I saw something ahead. A shape. Darker than the grass. Motionless. My heart pounded as I drew closer, each step loud in my ears. When I reached it, I realized it wasn't a person. It was a shoe. A child's sneaker. Old, weathered, the fabric stiff with time. Half buried in the dirt. I froze. The memory of that day slammed into me. The officer holding up Daniel's shoe, my aunt's scream, the dog sniffing and pulling forward. Had they missed this one, or was it a different shoe altogether? I crouched down and touched it. The fabric crumbled under my fingers, brittle with age. But it was real, solid. Proof. My throat tightened. I whispered his name before I could stop myself. Daniel! The grass rustled, not with the wind. This was different. A slow, deliberate shift, like something large moving just out of sight. The sound circled me left to right, then behind. I stood, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But the path, it had changed again. It no longer stretched straight ahead. Now it curved, twisting deeper into the grass. I don't know how long I followed it. Minutes, hours. The world felt unsteady, like I was walking in a dream I couldn't wake from. My skin prickled. My ears rang. And then it ended. The path just stopped. No clearing, no exit. Just grass pressing in from all sides. I turned in a slow circle, disoriented, my chest heaving. There was no way back, no way forward. Just walls of grass that seemed to lean closer with each breath I took. That's when I realized the ground beneath my feet was different. Softer, like it had been disturbed. I knelt, brushing my hand across the dirt. It gave under my touch, loose and uneven, as if something had been buried there. My stomach turned cold. I thought about Daniel, about the dogs circling, refusing to enter, about the officers whispering that the ground didn't feel right. I staggered back, shaking my head, my body trembling. I couldn't do it. I couldn't dig. I didn't want to know what was under there, but as I stood frozen, the grass rustled again. Louder this time, closer. I ran. I don't remember how. I don't remember which way I turned or how the path reappeared. One moment I was trapped, and the next I was stumbling out of the grass, falling hard onto gravel. The church looming in front of me like a ghost. The field behind me swayed gently in the wind, innocent, untouched. No path, no shoe, nothing. I sat there for a long time, shaking, covered in dirt, my hands still trembling. I never told anyone what I found. Not my parents, not my friends, not even my therapist years later, when I tried to explain why I can't stand the smell of tall grass, why I wake at night hearing whispers in the dark, because deep down, I know the truth. The path in the grass wasn't made by the wind. It wasn't made by time. It was waiting for me, just like it had been waiting for Daniel, and I know sooner or later it'll open again.